David Mitchell had conquered everything money could buy, but nothing had prepared him for that moment. A morning run through his upscale neighborhood, a calm routine, was interrupted by an 8-year-old girl with curious eyes and an enigmatic smile. "I know you," she said without hesitation, her voice as casual as it was unsettling. "Your photo is in my dad's wallet." David's world froze. Those words, seemingly innocent, unearthed secrets long buried, bringing to light a reality he had never imagined facing. The past he had avoided for a decade was now standing before him, disguised as a little girl. Who was her father? And why did he have David's picture? Every detail of this revelation seemed to crumble the empire he had built. A simple phrase would change everything. What was about to surface? David Mitchell adjusted his sleek running shoes, the kind that claimed to make you faster with each step, though he barely believed the marketing hype anymore. His mansion towered behind him, a monolithic symbol of success in a world that demanded constant ambition. Yet, despite all the accolades, the luxury cars, and the million-dollar contracts, there was a gnawing emptiness inside him. Every morning, he ran through the polished streets of his affluent neighborhood, trying to escape the thoughts that crept into his mind, thoughts he couldn't shake, no matter how fast he ran. His usual route circled around a park, filled with families enjoying the early morning sun. He usually ignored the sight, focusing on his breathing, his pace, anything to avoid confronting the isolation he felt. But today was different. Today, a small voice cut through the steady rhythm of his feet, pounding against the pavement. "Excuse me, mister?" A young girl's voice broke his trance. He skidded to a halt, catching his breath. Before him stood a little girl, her wide eyes brimming with curiosity and innocence. "Yeah," he replied, his voice gruff, not meaning to sound harsh but caught off guard. "Are you David Mitchell?" she asked, tilting her head as if the name was familiar but distant. David blinked, confused. "Yes, I am. Do I know you?" The girl smiled shyly. "No, but my daddy has a picture of you in his wallet." David's heart skipped a beat. A picture of him in someone's wallet. The only family he had left was Michael, but they hadn't spoken in over a decade. His chest tightened at the thought. Could it be? "Your daddy, what's his name?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael Mitchell," she said with a certainty that made David's stomach churn. "He's my daddy." David stood frozen, his mind racing. Michael, the name stirred up memories, long buried but never forgotten. His younger brother, the one he had left behind when he pursued his dreams, leaving his family, their problems, and their old life far in the rear-view mirror. 10 years had passed since he had last seen Michael. 10 long years of silence. Do you live around here?" David managed to ask, trying to keep his voice steady. Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Not too far." "Do you want to come meet my daddy?" David hesitated. He had 1,000 questions, none of which he was prepared to ask a little girl, but the idea of seeing his brother again, after all this time, was overwhelming. Part of him wanted to run in the opposite direction, back to his mansion where he could continue pretending that everything in his life was fine. But the other part, the part that missed his brother, urged him to follow her. "Okay," David said, surprising even himself. "Lead the way." As they walked, Emma chattered away, her voice a constant background noise as David's thoughts spiraled. How could Michael live so close? And yet, they hadn't crossed paths. Did Michael want to reconnect, or was this just some bizarre coincidence? David's mind was a storm of questions and regrets. What would he even say to his brother after all these years? When they reached a modest house, nestled between larger, more opulent homes, David's heart sank. This was Michael's home, simple, unassuming, the complete opposite of David's extravagant lifestyle. The guilt gnawed at him. He had left Michael behind to struggle while he rose to the top. "Daddy's inside," Emma said, skipping up the steps and flinging open the door without hesitation. David hesitated at the threshold. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. There, sitting at a worn dining table, was Michael. He looked older, more worn than David remembered, but there was no mistaking the familiarity in his features. Michael looked up, and for a moment, time stood still. His eyes widened as he took in the sight of his older brother, standing in his doorway after all these years. "David!" Michael's voice cracked with disbelief. David nodded, unable to speak. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, years of anger, regret, and missed moments. But in that moment, all David could feel was an overwhelming sense of loss for the years they had been apart, for the family he had abandoned. Michael stood slowly, his movements cautious, as if unsure whether David was real or just a figment of his imagination. The tension was palpable, neither brother knowing how to bridge the gap that had grown between them. Emma, sensing the strange atmosphere, looked between her father and her uncle, her young mind unable to grasp the weight of the moment. "Daddy, you okay?" Michael swallowed hard, his eyes never leaving David's. "Yeah, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm okay." David cleared his throat, struggling to find his voice. I didn't know you lived here," he said, the words feeling inadequate for the weight of the moment. Michael gave a bitter laugh. "Yeah, well, you never asked." David flinched at the words, but he knew they were deserved. He had been the one to walk away, to cut ties, to prioritize his success over his family. Now, standing in front of his brother, he felt the full weight of his choices. "I'm sorry," David whispered, the words catching in his throat. Michael's eyes softened, and for the first time, David saw a flicker of the brother he had once known, the one he had shared everything with, the one he had left behind. "Come on in," Michael said, stepping aside. "We've got a lot to talk about." David followed Michael into the small, cluttered living room. The house was nothing like his own. There were no grand chandeliers or sleek modern furniture. Instead, it was warm, lived in, with mismatched couches and family photos covering the walls. It smelled faintly of coffee and the lingering scent of last night's dinner. A sense of nostalgia washed over him as he realized how long it had been since he'd stepped into a place that felt like a home rather than a museum of his success. Emma bounced in ahead of them, unaware of the tension hanging in the air. "I'll go get my drawings. I want to show Uncle David," she exclaimed, running down the hallway before either man could respond. David sat awkwardly on the edge of the couch, his eyes scanning the room. He couldn't help but notice the photos lining the mantelpiece. There were pictures of Emma at various ages, her wide smile capturing the innocence of childhood. But what struck him most were the family photos. Michael and Emma, together at Christmases and birthdays, but no sign of Emma's mother. And then, among the more recent pictures, David saw a framed photo of their mother, a photo from years ago, before her passing. It was the same photo David had on his desk, a reminder of the family he'd lost. Michael stood in the doorway, watching David with a mixture of emotions. "You missed a lot," he said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of the years between them. David's throat tightened. He had known this moment would come. He had avoided it for years. But now, facing the brother he'd abandoned, he didn't know what to say. "I know," David finally whispered, his eyes still fixed on the photo of their mother. "I wasn't there when she died. I wasn't there for you, for any of it. And I should have been." Michael didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked over to the mantel and picked up the framed photo of their mother, holding it for a moment before setting it back down. "When Mom was sick, she kept asking about you," Michael said, his voice distant as he recounted the past. "She'd ask if you were coming home, if you were too busy to visit, and I lied to her. I told her you'd be there soon, that you just had things to take care of." His voice broke slightly as he turned to face David. "But you never came." David felt the weight of Michael's words like a punch to the gut. He had spent so many years convincing himself that he had made the right choices, that chasing his career, building his fortune, had been worth the sacrifices. But standing here now, listening to the pain in his brother's voice, he realized how hollow those justifications were. "I wasn't there for you either, Michael," David said softly. and I can't change that. Michael crossed his arms, his posture tense as he leaned against the wall. No, you can't, he agreed. But you made your choices, David. You chose your life, your success. And I was left to pick up the pieces. The bitterness in Michael's voice cut deep, but David couldn't argue with it. He had walked away from his family. He had chosen to focus on his business, leaving Michael to deal with everything. Their mother's illness, the funeral, the grief. And now, as he sat in this modest living room, the reality of what he had missed hit him like a freight train. I don't expect you to forgive me, David said, his voice quiet but sincere. I don't even know if I deserve that, but I'm here now. I want to make things right if I can. Michael studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The room fell silent, save for the distant sound of Emma humming to herself as she drew in her room. David could feel the weight of his brother's gaze, the unspoken history between them hanging in the air. You think showing up after 10 years is going to fix everything? Michael asked, his voice low but intense. You think one apology is enough? David shook his head. No, I know it's not enough, but it's all I have right now. I don't want to run from this anymore. Michael let out a breath, his arms dropping to his sides as he walked to the window, staring out at the quiet street beyond. Emma doesn't know about you, he said after a moment, his voice softer now. She doesn't know about the fight we had, about why you disappeared from our lives. David nodded, feeling a surge of guilt. He hadn't just abandoned Michael, he had abandoned Emma too. He hadn't even known she existed until today. I want to get to know her, he said, his voice laced with regret. If you'll let me. Michael turned back to face him, his eyes searching David's for a long moment. Emma's been through a lot, he said quietly. Her mom, she died 3 years ago, car accident. It's been just the two of us since then. David's heart sank. He hadn't known. Of course, he hadn't known. He had been too wrapped up in his own life, too distant from the people who had once mattered most to him. I'm sorry, Michael, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't know. Michael's expression softened slightly, but there was still a distance between them, an emotional chasm that had been years in the making. Yeah, he said quietly, you didn't. The room fell into a heavy silence once again. David's mind raced, trying to find the right words to bridge the gap between them, but every apology, every offer to make things right felt inadequate. Daddy, look, Emma's voice rang out, breaking the tension as she came bounding into the room, clutching a handful of drawings. I made these for Uncle David. Michael smiled weakly at his daughter, his eyes softening as he knelt down beside her. Let's show him, sweetheart. David watched as Emma proudly displayed her artwork, her small hands holding up crayon drawings of her and Michael, stick figures smiling under a bright yellow sun. This is me and Daddy, she said, pointing to the figures. And here's the one I just drew for you. She held up a new picture, this one with 3 figures, her, Michael, and David. David swallowed hard, emotion welling up in his chest as he looked at the drawing. It was simple, innocent, and yet it carried so much weight. He had missed so much, so many birthdays, so many moments, and here was this little girl, welcoming him into her life without hesitation, without judgment. It's beautiful, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you, Emma. Emma beamed, her smile lighting up the room. You can have it. You can put it in your house. David nodded, blinking back the tears that threatened to spill over. I will. I'll put it somewhere special. Michael stood, watching the exchange with a mixture of emotions playing across his face. Finally, he spoke. Look, David, I don't know if we can fix this, but for Emma's sake, maybe we can try. David nodded, his heart aching with the weight of the past. I'd like that, he said quietly. I'd really like that. Michael glanced down at Emma, who was still beaming with pride over her drawings. Let's take it one step at a time, he said, his voice soft but sincere. For her, David smiled, a sense of hope flickering to life inside him. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And after 10 years of silence, a start was all he could ask for. David left Michael's house that afternoon with Emma's drawing carefully folded in his jacket pocket. As he walked back to his mansion, his thoughts spiraled uncontrollably. The conversation with Michael had unearthed feelings he had buried for years: regret, guilt, and a deep sense of failure as a brother. The wealth, the success, the power, none of it mattered now. What was it all worth if he had lost the people who mattered most? The silence of his luxurious home greeted him when he returned. He dropped his keys onto the marble counter, the sound echoing through the grand entryway. His house, once a symbol of his achievements, felt emptier than ever. He wandered through the sprawling rooms, each more beautifully decorated than the last, but none of them felt like home. In his office, David pulled out Emma's drawing and carefully spread it on his desk. The crayon figures smiled up at him, simple, happy, unaware of the complexities that lay between the adults they represented. He traced the lines of the three stick figures, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what he had missed. He thought about Michael, how much his brother had changed, how life had clearly been hard on him. David had always imagined Michael would be fine, that he'd move on without him. But seeing the modest house, the old car parked outside, and the weight of grief in Michael's eyes, David knew now how wrong he had been. Michael hadn't just lost their mother, he had lost David too. The phone on his desk buzzed, jolting David from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen and saw the name of his assistant, Rachel, flashing. "Mr. Mitchell, you have a meeting with the board at 3 p.m. to review the quarterly report. Should I prepare the files?" Rachel's voice was crisp and professional. David stared at the phone for a moment before answering. "Cancel it." Rachel hesitated, clearly surprised. "Sir?" "Cancel the meeting, Rachel. I won't be there," David said, his voice firm. "Understood," Rachel replied, though David could hear the confusion in her tone. He hung up the phone and leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. For years, he had prioritized meetings, deadlines, and deals over everything else. His entire life had been consumed by the pursuit of success, the next big contract, the next million, and in doing so, he had let his family slip away. But now, after seeing Michael and meeting Emma, something had shifted inside him. The emptiness he had felt for so long, the void that no amount of money or power could fill, it all made sense now. It wasn't business deals he needed, it was family. David stood and walked to the large window overlooking his estate. The perfectly manicured lawns stretched out before him, the swimming pool glistening in the afternoon sun. It was everything he had ever wanted, everything except for the one thing he couldn't buy: time. Time he had lost with his brother, time he had missed with his niece, time he could never get back. He thought back to that moment when Michael had stood in the doorway, his face etched with a mixture of surprise and pain. It had been 10 years since they had last spoken, 10 years since that terrible argument that had torn them apart. David could still remember the words they had exchanged, harsh, angry words that neither of them had meant, but had left scars all the same. "I don't need you," David had shouted, his pride and ambition blinding him to the damage he was causing. "I can do this on my own." Michael had stared at him, his expression unreadable, before walking away without another word. That had been the last time David had seen his brother until today. A knock on the door broke his reverie. David turned to see his housekeeper, Marta, standing in the doorway. "Mr. Mitchell, would you like me to prepare dinner?" she asked, her voice gentle. David shook his head. "No, thank you, Marta. I'm not hungry." Marta hesitated for a moment, then nodded and left the room, leaving David alone with his thoughts once again. He knew he had to make things right with Michael, but how? A single apology wouldn't be enough to undo the years of hurt and resentment. He had abandoned his brother, left him to deal with their mother's illness and death alone. And then there was Emma, the niece he had never known, the little girl who had unknowingly bridged the gap between them today. David sat back down at his desk and picked up his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, stopping at Michael's name. His finger hovered over the screen, uncertain. What could he say? How could he fix something that had been broken for so long? Before he could overthink it, he tapped the call button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before Michael's voice came through. "Yeah," David swallowed, suddenly feeling nervous. "It's me, David." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. David could hear the faint sound of Emma's laughter in the background, and it twisted something inside him, an ache for the family he had lost. "What do you want?" Michael asked, his tone guarded. David took a deep breath. "I want to talk. I want to make things right." Michael let out a bitter laugh. "You think a phone call's gonna fix everything?" "No," David admitted. "I don't. But it's a start." There was another long pause before Michael spoke again, his voice softer this time. "You hurt me, David. You hurt me when you walked away." "I know," David said, his throat tightening. "And I've regretted it every day since." Michael was silent for a moment. "Why now? After all these years, why are you here now?" David didn't know how to answer that. He could say it was because he had missed his brother, or because he wanted to be a part of Emma's life. But the truth was, he didn't have a single reason. It was a culmination of years of guilt and loneliness, of realizing that no amount of success could fill the void left by family. "I don't have a good answer," David said finally. I don't want to lose any more time." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, David thought Michael might hang up. But then, to his surprise, Michael sighed. "Look, I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were," Michael said quietly. "But maybe we can try." David felt a flicker of hope. "And that's all I'm asking for." Another pause, then Michael's voice, softer now. "Emma liked you, you know. She's already talking about visiting your big house." David chuckled, though the sound was tinged with sadness. "She's a great kid." "Yeah, she is," Michael said, pride evident in his voice. "She's my whole world." David's chest tightened at the thought. He had missed so much of Emma's life, her birth, her first steps, her first words. But maybe, just maybe, he could be there for the rest of it. "Let's do something," David suggested. "The 3 of us, I don't care what, lunch, the park, whatever you want." Michael was quiet for a moment, considering the offer. "Emma would like that," he said finally. "We'll do breakfast. There's a diner near us. Nothing fancy, but Emma loves the pancakes." David smiled, relieved. "Sounds perfect. Tomorrow?" Michael asked. David nodded, even though Michael couldn't see him. "Tomorrow." They ended the call, and for the first time in years, David felt a sense of hope. It wasn't going to be easy. He knew that. There were years of hurt to mend, and it would take time. But at least now he had a chance to make things right, a chance to rebuild what he had broken. David sat back in his chair, his eyes drifting back to Emma's drawing on his desk. He smiled softly to himself, a feeling of warmth spreading through him. Tomorrow he would see them again. Tomorrow he would take the first step toward healing the wounds of the past. The next morning, David woke up early, the nervous excitement swirling in his chest too strong to let him sleep in. It felt almost like he was preparing for an important business meeting. But this was different. This was personal, so much more important than any deal he had ever closed. Today, he was meeting his brother and his niece for breakfast. He was taking the first real step toward mending the fractured relationship he had left behind a decade ago. David stood in front of his mirror, adjusting his shirt for what felt like the 10th time. His mansion was eerily quiet, save for the sound of his movements as he prepared to leave. He didn't know what to expect from this breakfast. Part of him feared it would be awkward, that he and Michael would sit there, staring at their plates, unable to bridge the gap between them. But he had to try. By the time David arrived at the diner, a small, cozy place tucked away on a quiet street, Michael and Emma were already there. He spotted them through the window, Emma, animated and full of energy, and Michael, looking tired but attentive as he listened to her chatter. David hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The warm, greasy smell of bacon and pancakes hit him immediately, and the low hum of conversation filled the air. It was a far cry from the upscale restaurants he was used to, but it felt more welcoming somehow, more genuine. "Uncle David!" Emma's excited voice rang out as soon as he stepped through the door. She waved enthusiastically from the booth where she and Michael sat, her face lighting up with pure joy. David smiled, waving back as he approached the table. "Hey, Emma," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "Good to see you again." Michael gave him a nod of acknowledgement, but didn't say anything right away. The tension between them was still palpable, though less sharp than the day before. David could feel the weight of their unresolved past hanging over them, but he pushed it aside for the moment. This breakfast wasn't about hashing out old arguments, it was about moving forward. "We already ordered," Emma announced proudly, holding up her menu. "Daddy let me pick, so we got pancakes with syrup and bacon." "You like pancakes, right?" David chuckled. "I love pancakes. Sounds like a good choice." The waitress came by to take David's drink order, and after a moment of indecision, he asked for coffee. He needed something to steady his nerves. As the waitress left, Emma launched into a story about school, something about her class pet hamster and how she got to take care of it for the weekend. David listened intently, laughing at her enthusiasm, though he could feel Michael's eyes on him the entire time. He knew Michael was still wary, still guarded, and who could blame him? David had walked away, abandoned him when he needed family the most. But today was about Emma, and in some small way it felt like a bridge, a way to connect through her, to start rebuilding their relationship one small moment at a time. The pancakes arrived, and Emma immediately dug in, her small hands expertly cutting the fluffy stack while drowning it in syrup. David watched, amused, as she made a sticky mess of her plate. She reminded him so much of Michael when they were kids, carefree, unburdened by the weight of the world. "So," Michael finally said, breaking his silence, "Emma's been talking about swimming in your pool ever since yesterday." David smiled. "She's more than welcome anytime. I've got more than enough space for both of you. Anytime you want to come over, just say the word." Michael didn't respond immediately, his eyes flickering with hesitation. David could see the struggle in his brother's face, the tug-of-war between wanting to trust him again and the fear of being let down. "We'll see," Michael said finally, his tone non-committal. David nodded, understanding that this was as much as he could hope for right now. Michael wasn't going to trust him overnight, not after everything that had happened, but the fact that they were sitting here together, having breakfast, was a start. "Uncle David," Emma said between bites, "can I come over next weekend? I want to see your house." David grinned. "Absolutely. How about this? We'll have a pool day. You, me, and your dad. Sound good?" Emma's face lit up. "Yes, I'll bring my floaties." Michael gave David a small, wary smile. It wasn't much, but it was a sign, a crack in the wall he had built around himself. David could see it in his eyes, the cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to being brothers again. As the breakfast continued, the conversation flowed more easily. Emma, with her endless energy and enthusiasm, was a constant source of laughter, breaking the tension with her stories and questions. David found himself relaxing, enjoying the simple pleasure of being with family, something he hadn't allowed himself to experience in so long. But beneath the light-hearted banter, David could feel the deeper, unresolved issues between him and Michael simmering just below the surface. There were still things they needed to talk about, things they needed to face. But for now, David was content to let the moment be what it was, a chance to reconnect, to start healing the wounds of the past. At one point, while Emma was distracted by her pancakes, David turned to Michael, his voice quiet but sincere. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said yesterday, about Mom, about everything." Michael's eyes flickered with something, pain, maybe, or regret. But he didn't respond immediately, instead taking a slow sip of his coffee. "I didn't realize how much I hurt you," David continued. "I was so caught up in my own life that I didn't stop to think about what you were going through, and I'm sorry for that." Michael set his cup down, staring at it for a moment before looking up at David. "You were always chasing something." he said quietly. Success, money, whatever, and I get that. But you left me behind, David. You left me to deal with everything on my own. David's chest tightened with guilt. I know, he said softly, and I can't change that, but I'm here now, and I want to be a part of your life, a part of Emma's life. Michael studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed, leaning back in the booth. I don't know, David. It's not easy to just forget everything that happened. I'm not asking you to forget, David said. I'm asking for a chance to make it right, to be there for you, for Emma. Michael was silent for a long time, the weight of his words hanging in the air. David could see the conflict in his eyes, the desire to trust again warring with the pain of the past. He knew this wouldn't be easy, that it would take time for Michael to fully open up again, but David was willing to put in the effort. Emma's voice broke the silence. Daddy, can we go to the park after this? Michael glanced at her, then back at David. Sure, he said, his voice softer now. We'll go to the park. David smiled, relieved. It wasn't much, but it was a step forward. A small step, but one in the right direction. After breakfast, they walked to the nearby park, Emma skipping ahead, her excitement palpable. David watched her with a mixture of awe and sadness, realizing how much he had missed. She was a bright, joyful child, and he hadn't been there for any of it, but maybe, if he was lucky, he could be there for what came next. As they walked, Michael fell into step beside David, the tension between them less oppressive now. They didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes from understanding, from shared history. At the park, Emma ran ahead to the swings, her laughter echoing in the crisp morning air. David and Michael stood by, watching her, both lost in their own thoughts. She looks happy, David said quietly, more to himself than to Michael. Michael nodded, his eyes on his daughter. She is. She doesn't know about all the baggage. She's just a kid, and I want to keep it that way. David swallowed the lump in his throat, feeling the weight of his brother's words. He had been so focused on his own guilt, his own regrets, that he hadn't fully realized how much Michael had carried all these years. He had been both mother and father to Emma, while David had been absent. I want to be a part of her life, Michael, David said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't want to miss any more time. Michael looked at him, his expression softening. Then don't, he said simply. David nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, it felt like he had a chance, a real chance to rebuild what he had broken. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky by the time they left the park. Emma, still full of energy, skipped ahead, oblivious to the complicated emotions that simmered between her father and her uncle. David walked beside Michael in silence, feeling the weight of their shared history pressing down on him. He had wanted this day to go smoothly, to feel like they were making real progress toward healing, but he could sense that there was still something unspoken between them. As they approached Michael's house, Emma turned and ran back toward them, her face flushed with excitement. Uncle David, can we go swimming next weekend? Please, she asked, tugging at his hand. David smiled, his heart swelling at the thought of her joy. Of course, Emma. We'll make a whole day of it. You can bring your favorite floaties. Emma grinned, her happiness contagious. Yes, I can't wait, she exclaimed, then ran ahead into the house. David and Michael stood outside for a moment, neither of them in a hurry to follow her in. Michael leaned against the railing of the front steps, his arms crossed as he looked at his brother. She really likes you, Michael said, his voice quiet. She's been talking about you non-stop since yesterday. David felt a mixture of pride and guilt at his brother's words. It felt good to know that Emma had taken to him so quickly, but it also reminded him of everything he had missed. He had been absent for so long, and yet here was this little girl who had accepted him without question. If only it could be that simple with Michael. I'm glad, David said, shoving his hands into his pockets. She's an amazing kid. You've done a great job with her, Michael. Michael didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared off into the distance, his jaw clenched as if he was wrestling with something inside. Finally, he sighed and shook his head. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing it alone." David's heart ached at the vulnerability in his brother's voice. For years, Michael had been carrying the weight of raising Emma by himself, and David hadn't been there to help. He hadn't been there for anything. "You don't have to," David said softly. "I want to be here for you, for Emma. Whatever you need, I'm here." Michael looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and doubt. "It's not that easy, David," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "You've been gone for so long. You don't just get to show up one day and fix everything." David nodded, knowing that his brother was right. He couldn't erase the past with a few kind words and promises, but he could try. He had to try. "I know I've got a lot to make up for," David said, his voice thick with sincerity. "I know I can't undo the years I've missed, but I'm not going anywhere this time. I want to be part of your lives, Michael. I want to be part of the family again." Michael's eyes softened, but there was still a guardedness in his expression. "Family," he repeated, as if the word itself carried too much weight to believe. "You walked away from family, David?" David flinched at the truth in his brother's words. He had walked away. There was no denying that. But standing here now, seeing the pain in Michael's eyes, he realized just how much he had lost by doing so. "I thought I was doing the right thing," David admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought that by leaving, by focusing on my career, I was doing what was best for me. But I was wrong. I lost you, Michael. I lost my family." Michael sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping as he ran a hand through his hair. "It wasn't just you that I lost," he said quietly. "Emma lost her uncle. Our mother lost her son." The mention of their mother hit David like a punch to the gut. He had spent so many years trying not to think about her, about how he had failed her in her final days. But now, hearing Michael say it out loud, the guilt came rushing back in full force. "I wasn't there for her," David said, his voice cracking. "I wasn't there when she needed me most." Michael looked at him, his expression filled with a mix of sorrow and anger. "She asked about you every day, you know. Even when she was too sick to get out of bed, she would ask me when you were coming home. I kept telling her you'd be there soon, that you were just busy, but you never came." David swallowed hard, the shame almost too much to bear. "I know," he whispered. "I know I failed her. I failed you." The air between them was heavy with unspoken grief, the pain of their mother's death still a raw wound that neither of them had fully healed from. David had tried to bury it, to push it down beneath layers of success and wealth, but it had always been there, festering in the back of his mind. "I don't expect you to forgive me," David said, his voice trembling with emotion. "But I want you to know that I'm sorry for everything." Michael was silent for a long time, his eyes fixed on the ground. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and filled with a quiet sadness. "It's not about forgiveness, David. It's about trust. And right now, I don't know if I can trust you." David felt his heart sink at his brother's words, but he understood. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. It would take time, time that David was willing to give, if it meant he could be part of Michael's life again. "I get it," David said softly. "I know it'll take time, but I'm here for the long haul, Michael. I'm not going anywhere this time." Michael looked at him, his eyes searching David's face for a moment before he nodded slowly. "I hope that's true," he said quietly. "For Emma's sake, I hope that's true." David's heart swelled with a mixture of hope and guilt. He knew that this wasn't a resolution, but it was a step in the right direction. For the first time in years, he felt like there was a chance, however small, that they could rebuild what had been lost. Later that evening, after returning to his mansion, David found himself sitting in the darkness of his expansive living room, the only light coming from the fireplace that crackled softly in the background. The silence of the house was deafening. It had never bothered him before, but now, after spending the day with Michael and Emma, the emptiness felt suffocating. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out Emma's drawing, unfolding it carefully. The simple crayon lines were crude, but they held so much meaning. 3 figures, him, Michael, and Emma, stood under a bright sun, their stick-figure arms linked together. David traced his fingers over the paper, his heart heavy with emotion. He had spent so many years chasing success, believing that it would bring him happiness. But now, looking at this innocent drawing, he realized how wrong he had been. The success, the wealth, the power, it had all come at a cost. A cost he wasn't willing to pay anymore. He thought about his conversation with Michael, about the pain and betrayal that still lingered between them. He had a long way to go before Michael could trust him again. But today had been a start. A small step toward healing the wounds of the past. David's phone buzzed on the coffee table, jolting him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen and saw Rachel's name flashing. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mr. Mitchell, I just wanted to remind you that the investors' dinner is tomorrow night," Rachel said, her tone brisk and businesslike. "They're expecting you to give a speech on the company's growth strategy." David leaned back on the couch, staring up at the ceiling. The investors' dinner, another event he had once considered crucial to his success. But now, after everything that had happened, it felt meaningless. "Cancel it," David said, his voice calm but firm. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Cancel it, sir. But the investors—" "I said cancel it, Rachel," David repeated. "I'm not going." Rachel hesitated again before responding. "Understood, sir. I'll let them know." David ended the call and set his phone down, the weight of his decision sinking in. For years, he had prioritized his career over everything else, his family, his relationships, even his own happiness. But not anymore. He was done with that life. He was ready to focus on what really mattered. As the fire crackled softly in the background, David allowed himself to relax for the first time in what felt like years. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that it would take time to repair the damage he had done. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace, a sense of hope. Tomorrow, he would call Michael. Tomorrow, they would start again. David woke early the next morning, the soft light of dawn filtering through the massive windows of his bedroom. He had hardly slept, his mind too occupied with thoughts of his brother, of Emma, and of the fragile hope that had begun to take root after their time together. The emptiness of the house had weighed heavily on him last night, and now, in the cold light of morning, he felt the urgency of his decision to change his life pressing down on him even more intensely. After showering and getting dressed, David found himself in the kitchen, staring at the untouched bowl of cereal in front of him. He wasn't hungry, but he knew he needed to eat something before the day started. He had cancelled all his meetings for the day, much to the confusion of his assistant Rachel, who was probably still trying to figure out what had changed in her usually work-obsessed boss. But David didn't care about the company right now. He had bigger things on his mind, things that were more important than profit margins or quarterly reports. As he pushed the cereal around in the bowl, his phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up, expecting another reminder from Rachel. But instead, he saw Michael's name on the screen. His heart skipped a beat as he quickly answered the call. "Hey," David said, trying to keep his voice calm. "What's up?" Michael's voice came through the line, a little hesitant, but not as cold as it had been in the past. "Hey, David, I was just wondering, are you free today?" David felt a surge of hope. "Yeah, I cleared my schedule. What's going on?" Michael paused, and for a moment, David thought he might change his mind. But then he spoke, his voice softer now. "Emma's been talking about your pool non-stop. She won't stop asking when she can come over." David smiled, relief washing over him. "I'd love that. You can both come over any time today. We'll make a whole day of it." "Are you sure?" Michael asked, still sounding cautious. "I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," David said firmly. "I want you to come, both of you." There was another pause before Michael finally said, All right, we'll head over around noon. David's heart lifted. Great. I'll see you then. By the time noon rolled around, David had already gone out of his way to prepare for their visit. He had made sure the pool was cleaned, set out towels, and even stocked the fridge with drinks and snacks, things he hadn't done in years for anyone but himself. He felt a strange sense of nervousness fluttering in his chest, like a kid waiting for friends to come over. He hadn't realized how much he wanted this, how much he needed it. At exactly 12 o'clock, the doorbell rang. David practically jumped up from the couch and hurried to the front door, opening it to find Michael and Emma standing on the doorstep. Emma was already dressed in a bright pink swimsuit, her eyes wide with excitement as she clutched a pair of floaties in her hands. "Uncle David!" Emma squealed, rushing past him and into the house without hesitation. "Where's the pool?" "I want to swim," David laughed, stepping aside to let her in. "It's out back. Go ahead and get started. I'll be right there." Emma bolted down the hallway, leaving David and Michael standing awkwardly at the front door. Michael glanced around, taking in the opulence of the mansion with a guarded expression. David could see the tension in his brother's shoulders, the uncertainty in his eyes. It was clear that Michael wasn't used to being in a place like this, and the gap between their lives felt more obvious now than ever. "You can relax, you know," David said gently, trying to break the tension. "It's just a house." Michael smirked, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Some house?" David shrugged, trying to downplay the obvious disparity between them. "It's too big for one person, honestly. I've been thinking about selling it." Michael raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the comment. "You sell this place?" David nodded, leading the way down the hallway toward the back of the house. "Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about what's important lately. And this place, it's just a reminder of how empty everything's been." Michael didn't respond, but David could see that the words had landed. They made their way outside to the pool, where Emma was already paddling around in the shallow end, her floaties keeping her buoyant as she kicked her legs. "Look, Daddy, I'm swimming!" Emma called out, her voice filled with joy. Michael smiled, watching his daughter with a mixture of pride and love. David could see the change in him, the way Michael's entire demeanor softened when he looked at Emma. It was clear that she was the center of his world, and for the first time, David understood just how much his brother had sacrificed to give her the best life he could. "She's amazing," David said quietly, standing beside Michael as they watched her play. Michael nodded, his eyes never leaving his daughter. "Yeah, she is." For a few moments, they stood in silence, the sound of Emma's laughter filling the air. It was a peaceful scene, but David knew there was still so much left unsaid between them. The weight of their past still hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. "Michael," David said after a while, his voice hesitant, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said yesterday, about trust." Michael glanced at him, his expression guarded again. "Yeah?" David swallowed, gathering his thoughts. "I know I've broken your trust before, and I know it's not going to be easy to earn it back, but I want you to know that I'm committed to this. I'm committed to being part of your life, part of Emma's life. I don't want to let you down again." Michael was silent for a long time, his eyes focused on the water. David could see the tension in his face, the internal battle he was fighting. Finally, he sighed and turned to face David. "I want to believe you, David," he said quietly. "I really do, but it's hard. After everything that's happened, after all the years you were gone, it's hard to just forget all that." David nodded, understanding. "I'm not asking you to forget. I just want a chance to prove that I've changed." Michael ran a hand through his hair, his expression conflicted. "I've been doing this on my own for so long. I'm not used to letting people in, especially not you." David's chest tightened at his brother's words. He could hear the pain in Michael's voice, the deep scars that had been left by his absence, but he also heard something else, something more hopeful. Michael wanted to trust him again, but he didn't know how. "You don't have to do it on your own anymore," David said softly. "I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Michael looked at him for a long moment, his eyes searching David's face as if trying to gauge the sincerity of his words. Finally, he nodded, though his expression remained wary. "We'll see," Michael said quietly. "Let's just take it one step at a time." David smiled, feeling a rush of relief. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was progress. And right now, that was enough. The afternoon passed in a blur of laughter and conversation. Emma kept David and Michael busy with her endless energy, swimming and splashing in the pool while they watched from the edge. It felt good, natural even, to be together like this. For the first time in a long time, David felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the water, Emma finally climbed out of the pool, wrapped in a towel. She sat between David and Michael, her eyes drooping with exhaustion, but her face still beaming with happiness. "That was the best day ever," Emma declared, leaning her head against Michael's arm. David smiled, his heart swelling at the sight of her contentment. "I'm glad you had fun, Emma." "We should do it again," she said, her voice sleepy but insistent. "Every weekend." David chuckled. "I think we can make that happen." Michael glanced at him, and for a brief moment, David saw a flicker of something in his brother's eyes, something that looked like trust. It was faint, but it was there. "I'll hold you to that," Michael said, his tone lighter than it had been earlier in the day. David nodded, feeling a sense of hope that he hadn't felt in years. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. As the evening came to an end, Michael and Emma prepared to leave. David walked them to the door, feeling a strange reluctance to let them go. "Thanks for today," Michael said, his voice quiet but sincere. "It meant a lot to Emma. And to me," David smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "It meant a lot to me too." They stood there for a moment, the silence between them no longer filled with tension, but with understanding. There was still a long way to go, but for the first time, David felt like they were heading in the right direction. As Michael and Emma drove away, David stood in the doorway, watching their car disappear down the street. A sense of peace settled over him, something he hadn't felt in years. He knew that the road to rebuilding his relationship with Michael wouldn't be easy, but he was ready for it. For the first time in a long time, David felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Days passed, and with each passing moment, David found himself more and more focused on reconnecting with Michael and Emma. He called regularly, inviting them over for dinner, suggesting trips to the park, and planning pool days like the one they had just shared. Each time, Michael hesitated, but eventually agreed, and David could sense that his brother was slowly beginning to thaw. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, still unspoken tensions between them. But David was patient. He knew that rebuilding trust took time, and he was willing to wait. For Emma's sake, if nothing else, he had to believe that they could mend the rift between them. But even as things seemed to be improving with Michael, there was something that gnawed at David's mind, something that wouldn't let him rest. The past he had left behind all those years ago wasn't just about the broken relationship with his brother. It was about their mother. And as much as David tried to avoid thinking about it, the memories kept creeping in, especially at night when the house was quiet and his mind was free to wander. He hadn't been there when she died. He hadn't been there during the years of her illness, when Michael had cared for her alone, and the guilt of that absence had haunted David ever since. He had buried himself in work, in the pursuit of success, telling himself that it was all for the greater good. But now, looking back, he could see how hollow those justifications were. One evening, after a particularly long day, David sat alone in his living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The house was dark, save for the dim light from the fireplace. He stared into the flames, his thoughts drifting to his mother once again. The last time he had seen her, she had been vibrant, full of life. He had promised to visit more, to stay connected, but that had been a lie he had told himself as much as her. The familiar weight of regret settled on his chest, heavy and suffocating. He took a sip of his drink, hoping to dull the ache, but it only seemed to amplify the emotions he had been trying to avoid. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Michael. David hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hey, Michael." "Hey," Michael replied, his voice quiet but clear. "I've been thinking about Mom." David's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected this. They had both been skirting around the topic for days, avoiding the deeper conversations that would inevitably force them to confront their shared grief. "Yeah?" David said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Emma asked about her today," Michael continued. "She's been asking more questions lately about her grandma, about why she never met you until now." David swallowed hard, guilt rising in his throat. He had never even considered how his absence might affect Emma's understanding of their family. "What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth," Michael said, though there was no accusation in his voice, "that we hadn't spoken in a long time. That things happened between us and we drifted apart." David nodded, though Michael couldn't see him. "It's more complicated than that," he said quietly. Michael sighed, the sound heavy with exhaustion. "I know it is, but I don't know how to explain it to her in a way that makes sense. How do you explain something like that to an 8-year-old? David's chest tightened. He couldn't imagine what it must be like for Michael to field questions about their fractured family. He had missed so much, not just in Emma's life, but in his brother's too. He had left Michael to bear the burden of their mother's death alone, and now he was asking him to deal with the fallout of David's absence as a father figure too. "I've been thinking about her a lot," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, I never really dealt with it, you know. I just ran away from it all." Michael was silent for a moment before he spoke again. "I don't know if you ever realized how hard it was. After you left, she was devastated. She tried to pretend everything was fine, but I could see it. She missed you, David. She missed you every day." David clenched his jaw, the guilt clawing at him like a physical force. He had known, on some level, that his departure had hurt their mother. But hearing Michael say it out loud made it real in a way that David hadn't fully processed before. "I don't know how to make up for that," David said quietly. "I don't think I ever can." Michael didn't respond immediately, and when he did, his voice was softer, less guarded than it had been in the past. "You can't change what happened," he said, "but you can change what happens next." David nodded, the weight of Michael's words settling in his chest. He had spent so long running from his past, but now it was time to face it. He couldn't undo the pain he had caused, but maybe, just maybe, he could make things right moving forward. The next day, David found himself sitting in his car, parked outside a modest cemetery on the outskirts of town. He hadn't been here since their mother's funeral. In fact, he had barely made it to the funeral at all, arriving just in time for the burial and then slipping away before anyone could notice. But now, as he sat in the car, staring at the rows of headstones, he knew that he couldn't run from this any longer. He had to face it. He had to confront the grief and the guilt that had been festering inside him for so many years. He stepped out of the car, the cool autumn breeze ruffling his hair as he made his way through the cemetery. The leaves crunched underfoot, and the air smelled faintly of pine and earth. It was peaceful here, quiet in a way that made the heaviness in David's chest feel even more pronounced. He found his mother's grave easily enough. It was a simple headstone, engraved with her name and the dates of her life. Standing before it, David felt a rush of emotions that he hadn't been prepared for. Guilt, grief, regret. It all washed over him like a wave, threatening to pull him under. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the stillness of the cemetery. "I'm so sorry." He didn't know what else to say. What could he say? That he had been selfish, that he had abandoned her when she needed him most. There were no words that could make up for that. I thought I was doing the right thing," he continued, his throat tight with emotion. "I thought if I focused on my career, if I became successful, that it would somehow make everything better, but it didn't. It just made me lose everything." David sank to his knees, the cold ground pressing against his legs as he bowed his head. I should have been here. I should have been there for you, for Michael, for everything. The wind rustled the trees around him, and for a moment, David allowed himself to feel the weight of his grief fully. He had spent so long pushing it away, burying it beneath layers of ambition and success. But now, there was no escaping it. He stayed there for what felt like hours, the sun dipping lower in the sky as the day passed. It wasn't until his phone buzzed in his pocket that he finally stirred. He pulled it out, seeing a text from Michael. "Emma's asking about you. We're making dinner if you want to join." David stared at the message for a long moment before typing out a quick reply. "I'll be there soon." As he stood up, brushing the dirt from his knees, he took one last look at his mother's grave. The pain of her loss would always be with him, he realized. But that didn't mean he had to keep running from it. He could honor her memory by being the man she had always wanted him to be, a brother, an uncle, and a part of the family he had left behind. "I'll do better," David whispered. "I promise." With that, he turned and walked back to his car, ready to face whatever came next. The drive to Michael's house was filled with a mix of apprehension and relief. The visit to their mother's grave had stirred up emotions David hadn't dealt with in years, but strangely, confronting his grief had given him a new sense of clarity. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt grounded, determined to start making things right. As he pulled up in front of Michael's modest home, the house seemed warmer than he remembered. There were lights on in the windows, and the faint smell of dinner wafted through the air as he stepped out of the car. The sound of Emma's laughter drifted through the open window, and David found himself smiling despite the weight still lingering on his heart. He hesitated for a moment at the front door, taking a deep breath before knocking. A few seconds later, the door swung open, and Emma stood there, her face lighting up as soon as she saw him. "Uncle David!" she squealed, throwing her arms around his waist. "You're here!" David knelt down to hug her back, feeling a warmth spread through him. "Of course I'm here," he said, his voice soft. "I wouldn't miss it." Emma pulled back, beaming up at him. "Daddy's making spaghetti, and I helped. You have to try it." David smiled, his heart swelling at her excitement. "I can't wait." Emma grabbed his hand and tugged him inside, leading him toward the small kitchen. The scent of garlic and tomato sauce filled the air, and David found himself instantly transported back to their childhood, back to the nights when their mother would cook the same meal, and the house would be filled with laughter and warmth. Michael was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of sauce. He glanced up when David entered, offering a small smile. "Hey," he said, his voice casual but carrying the weight of the moment. "Hey," David replied, feeling a little awkward as he stepped further into the kitchen. Michael wiped his hands on a towel and nodded toward the table. "Dinner's almost ready. I hope you're hungry." David chuckled, trying to ease the tension. "Starving." They sat down to dinner a few minutes later, Emma bouncing in her seat as she proudly displayed her contribution to the meal, freshly baked garlic bread that she had helped toast. David couldn't help but smile as she chatted on about her day at school, her excitement contagious. For the first time in years, it felt like they were a family again. The conversation was light and easy, with Emma doing most of the talking, and Michael and David exchanging glances that were less guarded than before. There was still a lot left unsaid, but in that moment, it didn't matter. They were together, and that was enough. As dinner wound down, and Emma excused herself to go watch her favorite show in the living room, the atmosphere between David and Michael shifted. Without Emma to fill the silence, the unspoken history between them seemed to creep back into the room. Michael cleared his throat, leaning back in his chair. "So, how have you been?" It was a simple question, but it carried so much weight. David had been so focused on reconnecting with his family that he hadn't really stopped to think about how to answer that question honestly. "I've been better," David admitted, his voice quieter now. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About Mom, about us, about the time I lost." Michael nodded slowly, his expression contemplative. "I figured as much. You're different lately, more reflective." David laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "Yeah, I guess visiting Mom's grave brought a lot of that to the surface." Michael looked at him, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You went to the cemetery?" David nodded, his throat tightening. "Yeah, I hadn't been there since the funeral. I needed to, I don't know, face it, I guess." Michael was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his plate. "I'm glad you did," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been going there pretty regularly, but it always felt like something was missing, like we hadn't fully said goodbye to her, you know?" David swallowed hard, nodding in agreement. "I know exactly what you mean." The air between them grew heavy with emotion, and for the first time, David felt the weight of their shared grief pressing down on both of them. It wasn't just the pain of their mother's death, it was the years of distance and silence between them, the wounds that had never fully healed. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I hated you for a long time, you know. After you left, I felt abandoned. I had to take care of everything, Mom, the bills, the funeral, and you were just gone." David's chest tightened at the raw emotion in his brother's voice. He had known, on some level, that Michael resented him, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. "I'm sorry," David said quietly, his voice filled with regret. "I was selfish. I thought I was doing the right thing by focusing on my career, but I see now how much I hurt you." "How much I hurt Mom?" Michael didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared down at the table, his jaw clenched as he processed David's words. After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice softer this time. "I don't want to keep carrying this around, David," he said, his eyes finally meeting his brother's. "I don't want to keep hating you, but it's hard. It's really hard." David nodded, understanding. "I know it is, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I just want you to know that I'm here. I'm not running away this time." Michael let out a breath, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little. "I believe you," he said quietly, "but it's going to take time." David smiled, though the weight of their conversation still lingered. "I'm okay with that." They sat in silence for a few moments, the heavy conversation finally settling. There was still so much between them, so many years of anger and hurt, but this was the first time they had truly talked about it, the first time they had acknowledged the pain they had both carried for so long. As the evening wore on, Michael excused himself to check on Emma, leaving David alone at the table. He stared down at his empty plate, his mind racing with thoughts of their conversation. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a step forward, and for now, that was enough. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Michael walked David to the door. The tension from earlier had eased, and there was a quiet understanding between them now, an unspoken agreement that they were both committed to making things work, even if it took time. "Thanks for coming over," Michael said, his voice sincere. Emma loved it, and it was good to talk. David smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "Yeah, it was. I'm glad we're doing this." Michael nodded, though there was still a hint of caution in his expression. "We'll see how it goes." David laughed softly. "Fair enough." They stood there for a moment, the silence between them comfortable now, no longer filled with the tension of unresolved emotions. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And for the first time in years, David felt like they were heading in the right direction. As David turned to leave, Michael called after him. "Hey, David." David paused, turning back to face his brother. "Yeah." Michael hesitated for a moment, then spoke, his voice quieter now. "I'm glad you came back." David's chest tightened at the words, but he smiled, feeling the weight of them settle in his heart. "Me too, Michael. Me too." With that, he walked out into the cool night air, the sense of hope that had been building inside him, growing stronger with each passing moment. There was still a long road ahead of them, but for the first time in years, he believed that they could find their way back to each other, and this time, he wasn't going to let go. The following days felt different for David. Each morning, he woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, his thoughts weren't consumed by work, deals, or boardroom strategies. Instead, his mind was on Michael and Emma, on the new bridge that was slowly being built between them. They had fallen into a kind of routine. Michael would text him about Emma's soccer games, or he'd drop by for dinner at Michael's house. David had even suggested they go to the zoo together, an idea that Emma had latched onto with enthusiasm, dragging her father into the excitement. But beneath the surface, David could feel the weight of something unspoken, an undercurrent of tension that neither he nor Michael had addressed. While things were improving, there were still old wounds that hadn't fully healed, and sometimes the silence between them felt heavier than the words they shared. It came to a head one afternoon when David decided to invite Michael and Emma to his house again for a barbecue. The day was perfect, sun shining, a light breeze blowing across the pool, and the smell of grilling meat filling the air. Emma had been swimming for hours, her laughter echoing off the water as David and Michael sat nearby, talking quietly over beers. For the first time in a long time, David felt like they were almost normal, like the years of distance and hurt were finally beginning to fade into the background. But just as they seemed to settle into that comfortable rhythm, the cracks in their relationship began to show. "So," Michael said suddenly, his voice quiet but carrying an edge, "you're still planning on selling this place?" David blinked, caught off guard by the question. He set his beer down and nodded slowly. "Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot lately. This house, it's too big. It doesn't feel like home anymore." Michael snorted softly, his gaze drifting toward the sprawling mansion behind them. "Doesn't feel like home, huh?" David could hear the bitterness in his brother's tone, and his chest tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" Michael shrugged, taking a long sip of his beer before responding. "Just funny, that's all. You spend years building this empire, this massive house, and now you decide it's not what you want." David's jaw clenched, the tension in the air palpable. He hadn't expected this conversation. Not today, not after the progress they had been making. But he could see it now, the resentment that Michael had been holding on to, simmering just beneath the surface. "It's not that simple," David said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I thought this was what I wanted. But things have changed. I've changed." Michael laughed, though there was no humor in the sound. "You've changed. You've been back for what, a few weeks? And suddenly you've changed." David frowned, his frustration growing. "Look, I know I screwed up. Okay, I know I was gone for a long time, but I'm trying to make things right now." "Are you?" Michael's voice was sharp, his eyes narrowing as he looked at David. "Because it feels like you're just doing what you've always done, making decisions for yourself without thinking about anyone else." David's heart pounded in his chest, the familiar feelings of guilt and anger rising up inside him. He had been trying, really trying, to be there for Michael and Emma, to make up for the years he had lost. But now, hearing Michael's accusations, it felt like all his efforts were being thrown back in his face. "I'm not that guy anymore, Michael," David said, his voice tight with emotion. "I'm not the selfish asshole who left you behind. I'm here now. I'm trying to be part of your life, part of Emma's life." Michael shook his head, his expression hardening. "But you weren't there when it mattered, David. You weren't there when Mom died. You weren't there when Emma was born. And now you think you can just waltz back into our lives and fix everything." David opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Emma's voice broke through the tension. "Uncle David, look at me!" David turned to see Emma standing at the edge of the pool, her arms outstretched as she prepared to jump. She grinned at him, waiting for his approval. "Go for it, Emma," David called out, forcing a smile as he tried to push down the emotions swirling inside him. Emma giggled and leaped into the water, the splash echoing in the quiet afternoon. For a brief moment, the tension between David and Michael dissipated, their attention focused on the little girl who seemed blissfully unaware of the undercurrents of conflict. But as Emma resurfaced, laughing and splashing, David felt the weight of Michael's gaze on him again. Emma doesn't know any of this, Michael said quietly, his voice filled with frustration. She doesn't know why you were gone. She doesn't know about Mom, about how you left us. David flinched, the guilt twisting in his gut. I don't want her to know. I don't want her to see me like that. Michael's eyes flashed with anger. And there it is. You're still making it about you, about what you want. David felt his temper rising, the conversation spiraling out of control. He had worked so hard to get to this point with Michael, to rebuild their relationship piece by piece, but now it felt like it was all unraveling. You think this is easy for me, David snapped, his voice rising. You think I don't know how much I screwed up. I'm doing everything I can to make things right, but it's like no matter what I do, it's never enough for you. Michael stood up, his jaw tight as he glared down at David. You don't get it, do you? You think you can just buy your way back into our lives with fancy barbecues and pool days? This isn't about money, David. It's about trust, and you broke that a long time ago. David stood as well, his hands clenched at his sides. I'm trying to earn that trust back, Michael, but you have to meet me halfway. You can't keep holding the past over my head forever. Michael's eyes flashed with hurt and anger. Maybe you don't get to decide how long I hold on to it. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. David felt a lump form in his throat, the realization sinking in that no matter how hard he tried, the past might always stand between them. Before he could respond, Emma swam up to the edge of the pool, looking up at them with wide eyes. Daddy! Uncle David! Are you mad at each other? Both men froze, the tension between them suddenly feeling like a crushing weight. Michael knelt down beside the pool, forcing a smile as he reached out to ruffle Emma's wet hair. No, sweetheart, Michael said softly. We're not mad. We're just talking. Emma didn't seem convinced, but she nodded slowly. Okay. Can we have ice cream now? Michael chuckled, though the sound was strained. Sure. We'll get some ice cream. As Emma climbed out of the pool, Michael stood up and looked at David, his expression weary. We'll talk later, David nodded, his chest tight with emotion. He watched as Michael wrapped a towel around Emma and led her inside, leaving David alone by the pool. The sound of the water lapping against the tiles filled the silence, but it did little to soothe the storm of emotions raging inside him. For the first time since he had come back into their lives, David wondered if maybe, just maybe, he couldn't fix this. No matter how hard he tried, the past might be too much for Michael to forgive. Later that evening, after Michael and Emma had left, David sat alone by the pool, staring out at the water. The sun had long since set, and the night air was cool against his skin. He hadn't felt this lost in years, not since the day he had walked away from his family all those years ago. He had thought that coming back, trying to rebuild those connections, would be enough. But now, it felt like everything was slipping through his fingers. As he sat there, lost in thought, his phone buzzed on the table beside him. He picked it up, expecting another business-related text, but instead, it was a message from Michael. We'll figure this out, but it's going to take time. David stared at the words, a mixture of relief and frustration flooding through him. He wanted things to be better now. He wanted to fix everything. But maybe Michael was right. Maybe some things just couldn't be rushed. With a heavy sigh, David typed out a quick reply. I know. I'm not giving up. He set his phone down and leaned back in his chair, the cool night air wrapping around him like a blanket. He wasn't giving up, not on Michael, not on Emma, and not on the family he had lost. But he also knew that this wasn't going to be easy. There were still cracks in their relationship, cracks that ran deep. And it was going to take more than just words to fix them. The tension from the barbecue lingered in the days that followed. Michael's words echoed in David's mind. It's about trust, and you broke that a long time ago. No matter how much progress they made, it was clear that the past wasn't something Michael could easily move beyond. David had spent so many years living in a different world, chasing success, building an empire, and avoiding the emotional fallout of the family he had left behind, that now Returning to rebuild those bridges felt like walking on fragile ground. Every step forward was fraught with the risk of collapse, but David wasn't ready to give up. He couldn't, not after seeing the spark of possibility in Emma's eyes, and the moments of connection that he and Michael had begun to experience. He had tasted what it felt like to have family again, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. In the days following their argument, David gave Michael some space. The conversation at the barbecue had been raw, and Michael needed time to process. David figured it was best to let the dust settle before trying to push for any more progress. But on the 5th day, his phone buzzed, and to his surprise, it was a message from Michael. "Can you meet me for lunch?" David's heart leapt in his chest. "Yeah, of course. Where?" Michael responded with the address of a small diner on the outskirts of town. David recognized it immediately. It was a place they had gone to as kids with their mom. It was an unassuming spot, far from the flashy restaurants David was used to frequenting, but it held a certain nostalgia. As David drove to the diner, memories of their childhood flooded his mind. Their mother had loved the place. She'd always say it had the best pie in town, even though the rest of the food was nothing to write home about. It had been a simpler time, before everything became so complicated. When David arrived, Michael was already seated in a booth by the window. He looked up as David approached, offering a small nod in greeting. There was a tension in the air, but it wasn't as sharp as it had been at the barbecue. It was more tentative, like they were both waiting to see what would happen next. David slid into the booth across from his brother, unsure of how to start the conversation. Michael beat him to it. "I've been thinking a lot," Michael said, his voice low. "About what you said, about trust." David nodded, bracing himself for whatever was coming next. Michael took a deep breath, his fingers fidgeting with the napkin on the table. "Look, I don't want to keep throwing the past in your face, but you've got to understand that it's not just about what you did. It's about what you left behind." David swallowed, and guilt rising in his chest. "I know. I left you with everything." "It wasn't just that," Michael continued, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "You left me with the memories. The pain of losing Mom, the years of watching her fade away, knowing she wanted you there and you weren't. I had to live with that every day. And then, after she was gone, it was just me and Emma." David clenched his fists under the table, feeling the weight of his brother's words. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm so sorry." Michael stared at him for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I don't need you to say sorry, David. I need you to understand that this isn't something you can just walk back into and fix overnight. Emma, she's growing attached to you, and that scares me." David's heart ached at the mention of Emma. He had come to care for her so deeply in such a short amount of time, and the thought of losing that connection was unbearable. "I would never hurt her," David said, his voice firm. "I'm here for good." Michael's gaze softened slightly, but the doubt was still there. "I want to believe you. For her sake, I really do. But you've got to prove it." David nodded, the determination burning inside him. "I will. Whatever it takes, I'll prove it." Michael leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. "You want to prove it? Then start by showing up for the small things. The soccer games, the school events, the birthdays. Not just the big gestures like pool parties and barbecues." David blinked, taken aback by the simplicity of Michael's request. He had been so focused on making grand gestures to win back their trust that he hadn't considered the importance of the day-to-day moments. The small, consistent acts of showing up. "I can do that," David said, his voice steady with resolve. "I'll be there." Michael nodded, though he still looked cautious. "Emma has a soccer game tomorrow afternoon. Why don't you come?" "I'll be there," David promised. The next day, David found himself standing on the sidelines of a soccer field, surrounded by parents and kids, feeling slightly out of place in his tailored suit. He had come straight from a meeting, and the contrast between the corporate world he had just left and the world of children's soccer couldn't have been more stark. He scanned the field, searching for Emma. It didn't take long to spot her. She was in the middle of the field, her bright pink jersey standing out among the sea of green. She was running toward the ball, her face set in determination as she kicked it toward the goal. David smiled, a sense of pride swelling in his chest as he watched her. She was good, quick on her feet and focused. He could see the joy in her movements, the pure, unfiltered happiness of a child playing the game she loved. Michael stood a few feet away, watching the game with an intensity that made David smile. It was clear that being a father was Michael's whole world, and David admired that about him. He had done such a good job with Emma, raising her on his own, and now David wanted to be a part of that. He wanted to help in whatever way he could. As the game went on, David found himself getting more and more into it, cheering along with the other parents, clapping when Emma's team scored. Every time she looked over at him, he waved, and she grinned back at him, her eyes lighting up with excitement. When the game ended, Emma came running over, her face flushed with exertion but beaming with pride. "Did you see that, Uncle David? We won!" David laughed, kneeling down to her level. "I saw. You were amazing out there." Emma beamed, her chest puffing out with pride. "I'm glad you came." David's heart swelled at her words. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world." Michael walked over, his expression unreadable but less tense than it had been before. "Good game, Emma," he said, ruffling her hair. Emma grinned up at him, then turned to David. "Daddy said we could get ice cream after. Are you coming with us?" David glanced at Michael, unsure if he was welcome, but to his surprise, Michael nodded. "Yeah, come with us. It's a tradition after every game." David smiled, feeling a surge of relief and gratitude. "I'd love to." They spent the rest of the afternoon at a small ice cream shop near the soccer field, the three of them sitting at an outdoor table, enjoying the warm sun and the simple pleasure of ice cream on a Saturday afternoon. Emma chatted non-stop about the game, her excitement contagious. Michael was quieter, but there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. He wasn't as guarded as before, and every now and then David would catch him glancing over, as if assessing whether David truly belonged in this picture of their family. And for the first time in a long time, David felt like maybe he did. As the sun began to set and they prepared to leave, Michael turned to David, his expression thoughtful. "You know, when you left, I didn't think you'd ever come back." David swallowed, the weight of Michael's words settling on his chest. "I wasn't sure I would either." Michael nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "But you're here now, and that's something." David smiled, feeling a sense of hope bloom inside him. "I'm not going anywhere, Michael. I mean that." Michael studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll see." It wasn't a full acceptance, but it was more than David had expected, and for now, it was enough. Later that night, as David sat alone in his living room, reflecting on the day, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of belonging. It wasn't perfect, and there were still cracks in the foundation of their relationship, but the pieces were slowly falling into place. He was a part of Michael and Emma's life now, and he was determined to stay. No matter how long it took, no matter how hard it was, he would prove that he was in this for the long haul, because family was worth fighting for. Over the next few weeks, David made good on his promise. He showed up for soccer games, school events, dinners. He was there, quietly weaving himself back into the fabric of Michael and Emma's lives. With every passing day, the tension between him and Michael seemed to ease, little by little, as if the trust they had once lost was slowly being rebuilt. But beneath the surface, there was still an undercurrent of uncertainty. David could sense it in Michael's guarded glances, in the way his words were sometimes clipped, as if he was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then there were the conversations they weren't having, the deep, emotional discussions about their mother, about the years David had missed. Those wounds hadn't fully healed, and David knew they never would until they confronted them head-on. For now, though, David focused on the small victories. He had become a fixture in Emma's life, and the joy she brought him was more than he could have ever expected. She had this effortless way of bridging the gap between him and Michael, bringing them closer with her innocence and enthusiasm. Every time David saw her smile or heard her laugh, he felt like he had finally found something worth holding on to. But as David settled into this new routine, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something unsaid between him and Michael, something that had been buried deep but was slowly rising to the surface. It was as if Michael was holding onto a secret, something that went beyond the years of anger and resentment, and as much as David wanted to ignore it, he knew that sooner or later it would come out. It happened one evening, after another of Emma's soccer games. Michael had invited David back to the house for dinner, and they sat around the small kitchen table, laughing over stories of Emma's antics on the field. The tension that had once filled their conversations seemed to have dissipated, replaced by a tentative sense of normalcy. It almost felt like old times. Almost. But as Emma finished her meal and excused herself to go watch TV, Michael's expression changed. The easy smile that had been on his face moments before faded, replaced by a look of quiet contemplation. David noticed the shift immediately, his own smile faltering as he sensed that something was coming. Michael cleared his throat, not meeting David's eyes. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." David's stomach tightened. "What is it?" Michael leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He looked anxious, as if he had been holding on to something for far too long. "It's about Emma." David's heart skipped a beat, his mind racing through all the possibilities. He thought of all the things he didn't know about her, about the years he had missed. "What about her?" Michael hesitated, his fingers tapping against the edge of the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and filled with a heaviness that made David's chest tighten. "She's not just my daughter," Michael said quietly. She's our niece." The words hung in the air, heavy and thick with meaning. David stared at his brother, not fully comprehending what he had just heard. "Our niece," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael nodded, his gaze finally meeting David's. "Her mother wasn't just my wife. She was our sister." David's breath caught in his throat, his mind struggling to process the words. "Our sister." The confusion on his face deepened as he tried to make sense of it all. "But we never had a sister." Michael's expression hardened, the weight of years of secrets and lies falling on his shoulders. "We did," he said softly. "But she was given up for adoption before either of us were born. Mom never told us. She only told me after she got sick." David's world tilted on its axis. He felt like the ground beneath him had shifted, like everything he thought he knew had been ripped away. What are you talking about?" His voice was shaky, disbelief swirling in his chest. Michael let out a long, weary sigh, as if he had been carrying the burden of this secret for far too long. Her name was Sarah. Mom was young, barely out of high school when she got pregnant. She didn't tell anyone, not even Dad. She had the baby in secret and gave her up for adoption before they got married. She never spoke of it again. David's head spun with the revelation. So you're telling me that Emma's mother was our sister?" Michael nodded slowly, his expression filled with regret. "Mom didn't tell me until right before she died. She wanted me to know the truth before it was too late. And then, when Sarah found us years later, it was too late for you to know." David's mind raced as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Sarah, his sister, the sister he never knew he had found Michael and had a daughter with him. And now Emma, the little girl he had come to love so deeply, wasn't just his niece by marriage. She was his blood, his family. "Why didn't you tell me?" David whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. "Why did you keep this from me?" Michael's gaze dropped to the table, guilt etched on his face. "I wanted to, but by the time I found out, we weren't speaking, you were gone, and then when you came back, I didn't know how to tell you. It seemed like too much all at once." David stared at his brother, his heart pounding in his chest. "So, all this time, you knew I had a sister, and you didn't tell me." Michael looked up, his eyes filled with sorrow. I didn't know how. I didn't want to bring up more pain. David stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back as he tried to process everything. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions: shock, betrayal, anger. How could Michael keep something like this from him? How could their mother keep such a massive secret for so many years? David, Michael said, standing up as well. I know this is a lot. I know it's not fair. But Sarah didn't want to be found. She reached out to me, not you. And by the time I had the chance to tell you, we weren't even talking. David's hands trembled as he tried to calm the storm of emotions raging inside him. And Emma, he asked, his voice barely a whisper, does she know? Michael shook his head, his expression pained. No, she just thinks Sarah was her mom and that she's gone now. I haven't told her about you being her uncle by blood. I thought it would be too confusing. David couldn't believe what he was hearing. His entire world had been turned upside down in a matter of minutes, and now he was grappling with the knowledge that the little girl he had grown to love wasn't just Michael's daughter. She was his niece, his real niece. I should have told you sooner, Michael said softly, but I didn't know how. I'm sorry. David swallowed the lump in his throat, his emotions swirling. He wanted to be angry, to lash out at Michael for keeping this from him. But he could see the regret in his brother's eyes, the weight of the burden he had carried all these years. What do we do now? David asked, his voice strained. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, I thought you deserved to know the truth. David nodded slowly, trying to process the enormity of the revelation. I appreciate that. But this changes everything. Michael looked down, his shoulders sagging. Yeah, it does. For a long time, neither of them spoke, the silence between them heavy with the weight of the secrets that had been revealed. David's mind raced with the implications of what he had just learned. He had a sister he never knew, and now she was gone, leaving behind a daughter who had no idea of the truth. Finally, David broke the silence. I need some time to think. Michael nodded, his expression understanding. Take all the time you need. David turned to leave, his heart heavy with the burden of the revelation. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, he felt the full weight of everything pressing down on him, the years of distance, the broken trust, the secrets that had been kept. He didn't know how he was going to process it all. He didn't know how he was going to face Emma now, knowing the truth about who she really was. But one thing was clear. Nothing was ever going to be the same again. The drive home felt like a blur. David's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, as his mind raced with the enormity of what he had just learned. He kept replaying Michael's words in his head, over and over, trying to make sense of the truth that had been hidden from him for so long. Sarah was our sister. Emma is your niece. The words echoed in his mind, each repetition deepening the confusion, the betrayal, the shock. He had spent weeks reconnecting with Michael and Emma, believing he was repairing a broken bond with his brother and his niece. And now, the truth of their shared bloodline added a layer of complexity that he hadn't been prepared for. As he pulled into his driveway and turned off the engine, David sat in the silence of his car, staring blankly at the dashboard. How was he supposed to process all of this? How was he supposed to move forward, knowing that his entire relationship with Emma had been built on a lie of omission? He felt a knot form in his stomach as he thought about the little girl who had so easily opened her heart to him. Emma had trusted him, welcomed him into her life with open arms. And all this time, she had no idea that the uncle she had just gotten to know was also her blood relative. She didn't know about Sarah, about the tangled web of family secrets that had shaped her life without her ever realizing it. David knew that Emma was still young, too young to understand the full complexity of the situation, but eventually she would need to know the truth. She deserved to know, and the thought of having that conversation filled David with a deep sense of dread. How do you explain something like this to an 8-year-old? How do you tell her that the story of her family is far more complicated than she ever imagined? David's mind spun with questions and uncertainties, but one thing was clear. He couldn't ignore this. He had to confront it. He had to talk to Michael again, really talk this time, without the guardedness, without the fear. If they were going to rebuild their family, they had to do it honestly, without secrets weighing them down. With a heavy sigh, David finally got out of the car and walked into his empty house. The spacious, luxurious rooms that had once symbolized his success now felt cold and hollow. The success he had spent so many years chasing seemed meaningless in the face of the revelations he had just learned. All the money, the power, the prestige, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered now was family, and the fragile thread that connected him to Michael and Emma. The next morning, David woke early, the restless night behind him, but the weight of the previous day still heavy on his chest. He knew what he had to do. He needed to talk to Michael again. He couldn't let this fester any longer. He had to confront the truth, no matter how painful it was. David grabbed his phone and texted Michael, "Can we talk? I need to see you." The response came quickly. "Yeah, come over whenever." David felt a mixture of relief and anxiety as he headed to Michael's house. The air was crisp as he drove, and the early morning sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the road. But even the beauty of the morning couldn't shake the tension building inside him. When he arrived at Michael's house, he was greeted by the familiar sight of Emma's bicycle leaning against the front porch, her soccer ball abandoned on the lawn. The normalcy of the scene contrasted sharply with the turmoil inside him. He took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Michael opened the door a moment later, his face unreadable. "Come in," he said quietly. David stepped inside, feeling the weight of the conversation they were about to have pressing down on him. The house felt different today, quieter, more tense. Emma was nowhere to be seen, and David assumed she was either still sleeping or out playing with friends. Michael led David into the living room, where they sat down across from each other. The silence between them was heavy, charged with the unspoken tension of everything that had come to light the night before. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about what you told me," David said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but the emotion behind it was clear. "About Sarah, about Emma." Michael nodded, his expression somber. "I figured," David leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "Why didn't you tell me sooner, Michael? Why keep this from me all these years?" Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I wanted to tell you, David, but when Sarah came into my life, we weren't talking. You were gone. I didn't know how to reach out to you. And when Mom told me the truth about Sarah before she died, it felt like too much. I was already dealing with her illness and then losing her. It was all too much." David's chest tightened at the mention of their mother. The guilt he had carried for so long, the guilt of not being there when she needed him most, came rushing back with full force. "I wasn't there," David whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I wasn't there for her or for you." Michael looked at him, his expression softening. "No, you weren't, but I get why you left. I was angry back then, but I get it now. You were chasing something bigger than this town, bigger than what we had." David shook his head, his throat tight. "But it wasn't worth it, Michael. None of it was worth what I lost. I missed everything." Michael's gaze flickered with understanding, and for the first time, there was a hint of empathy in his eyes. "You missed a lot," he agreed, "but you're here now. And that counts for something." David let out a shaky breath, relief flooding through him. But even with the progress they had made, there was still one question that lingered in his mind. One question that he couldn't ignore. "What about Emma?" David asked, his voice low. "Are we going to tell her?" Michael's expression darkened slightly, and he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I don't know. She's still so young, David. I don't know how she would handle something like this." "She deserves to know the truth," David said, his voice firm. "She deserves to know who her mother really was, and who I really am." Michael sighed, his gaze drifting to the floor. "I know, but I'm scared, David. She's been through so much already. Losing Sarah, growing up without a mom. I don't want to confuse her more." David understood Michael's fear. He understood the instinct to protect Emma from the complicated reality of their family's past, but at the same time, he knew that they couldn't keep this secret forever. Eventually, Emma would find out one way or another, and when she did, it was better for her to hear it from them. "I get that you want to protect her," David said softly, "but keeping this from her won't protect her. It'll just make it harder when she finds out later." Michael was silent for a long moment, his brow furrowed as he considered David's words. Finally, he looked up, his expression conflicted. "You're right," he said quietly, "but I don't know how to tell her. How do you explain something like this to a little girl?" David's heart ached at the thought of Emma's confusion, her innocent world being shattered by the truth. But he also knew that they couldn't keep lying to her, not if they wanted to build an honest relationship with her. "We'll figure it out," David said, his voice steady. "We'll do it together." Michael looked at him, the hesitation still evident in his eyes, but there was also a flicker of trust, a small glimmer of hope that they could get through this as a family. "Okay," he said quietly, "but not yet. Let's give it some time. Let's figure out how to explain it in a way she'll understand." David nodded, relieved that they were on the same page. "Whenever you're ready, I'll be there." For the first time in a long time, there was a sense of unity between them, a shared understanding that they were in this together. The road ahead was still uncertain, but David knew that they could navigate it, as long as they were honest with each other. As they sat in silence, the weight of the truth hanging between them, David felt a strange sense of peace. The secrets of the past had finally been brought into the light, and while it hadn't been easy, it was necessary. Now, they could start rebuilding, with no more lies between them. Later that evening, as David drove home, his mind was still racing with thoughts of Emma and the conversation they would eventually have to have. He had never been good at explaining complex emotions, especially to a child, but he was determined to do it right, for Emma, for Michael, and for the memory of the sister he never knew. When David arrived home, the house felt quieter than usual, as if the weight of the day had seeped into its very walls. He sat down on the couch, staring blankly at the empty room around him. The luxury, the success, the empty grandeur. It all felt so distant from what really mattered. For years, he had been running from the past, running from the guilt, running from the pain. But now it was time to stop running. It was time to face it all head on, no matter how hard it was. David picked up his phone and scrolled through the photos he had taken over the past few weeks. Photos of Emma at her soccer games, laughing by the pool, smiling up at him with that infectious joy that only children possess. She was so full of life, so full of love. And now, more than ever, David knew that he couldn't let her down. He wouldn't. The days following David and Michael's conversation about Emma were quieter, but not in an unsettling way. There was a shared understanding now, a sense that the most difficult truths had been acknowledged. Yet the weight of the revelation about Sarah still lingered over them, like a shadow waiting to settle. David and Michael didn't talk about it again immediately. There was no rush, at least that's what they told themselves. For now, the focus remained on the everyday moments, the building blocks of a life they were all still trying to reconstruct. They both knew that eventually they would have to sit Emma down and tell her the truth. But for now, they were content to wait, to enjoy the fragile peace they had begun to create. David continued to immerse himself in Emma's world, showing up for her soccer games, taking her for ice cream after school, and joining Michael for family dinners. And in those moments, things felt almost normal. The three of them together, laughing, talking, bonding. It was the family dynamic David had longed for, but hadn't realized how much he needed. But no matter how much progress they made, there was always an undercurrent of tension. David could feel it in the way Michael's eyes sometimes flicked toward him when Emma wasn't looking. It was as if Michael was still waiting for David to fail, for him to revert to the man who had walked out on his family all those years ago. And then there was Emma. She had no idea about the complex history that tied her uncle and her father together. She didn't know about Sarah, her mother, who had been David's sister. She didn't know about the years of pain and regret that had shaped the lives of the adults around her. But as innocent as she was, Emma wasn't completely oblivious. David could tell that she sensed something, even if she didn't fully understand it. There were moments when she would look up at him with those wide, curious eyes, as if she was on the verge of asking a question but didn't quite know what to say. It was during one of these moments that things began to shift. One Saturday afternoon, David decided to take Emma to a local park. It was one of those perfect fall days, with a cool breeze blowing through the trees and the scent of leaves in the air. They had just finished another one of her soccer games, and Emma, as usual, was full of energy and excitement. As they walked along the path, Emma skipped ahead, her laughter ringing out like music. David followed behind, watching her with a smile on his face. She was such a force of light in his life now, and he couldn't imagine a time when she hadn't been there. "Uncle David!" Emma called out, turning to face him with a wide grin. "Let's go on the swings!" David chuckled, jogging to catch up with her. "All right, let's do it." They reached the swings, and Emma immediately jumped onto one, kicking her legs in the air as David pushed her gently. She giggled with every swing, her laughter infectious, and for a moment, David felt like everything was right in the world. But then, as the swing slowed and Emma's giggles faded, she glanced over her shoulder at David with a curious expression. "Uncle David?" David stepped to the side of the swing, catching it as it slowed. "Yeah, Emma." She hesitated for a moment, her small hands gripping the chains of the swing tightly. "How come you never talk about my mommy?" David froze, his heart skipping a beat. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't been prepared for it. Emma looked up at him with those big, innocent eyes, waiting for an answer. "Daddy talks about her sometimes," she continued, her voice soft. "But you don't. Don't you miss her too?" David's throat tightened as he struggled to find the right words. How could he explain the truth to her? How could he tell her about the sister he never knew, about the mother she never got to grow up with? David began, his voice faltering. "I do miss her, Emma. I miss her a lot." Emma tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Did you know her?" David swallowed hard, the weight of the question pressing down on him. He wanted to be honest with her, but he also knew that this wasn't the time. Not yet. They weren't ready to tell her everything. "I didn't know her as well as your daddy did," David said carefully, trying to navigate the conversation without giving too much away. "But she was a special person, just like you." Emma nodded slowly, seeming to accept the answer for now. But David could see that the question had sparked something in her, a curiosity that wasn't going to go away anytime soon. "Will you tell me more about her?" Emma asked quietly, her voice filled with an innocence that broke David's heart. "I want to know what she was like." David smiled softly, kneeling down beside the swing so he was at her level. "Of course, Emma. I'll tell you everything I can." He gently pushed the swing again, and as Emma kicked her legs back and forth, her giggles returned, but David's mind was far from the moment of play. He couldn't ignore the fact that Emma was growing older, more aware. She would keep asking questions, and eventually they would have to give her answers. That night, after dropping Emma off at Michael's house, David sat alone in his car, the weight of the day pressing down on him. He thought about Emma's questions, about how much she didn't know, and how much he wished he could protect her from the complicated truth. But deep down, David knew that the truth couldn't be hidden forever. He and Michael would have to tell her soon, sooner than either of them had expected. With a heavy sigh, David pulled out his phone and texted Michael, "We need to talk about Emma. She's asking questions about Sarah." The reply came quickly, "Come over tomorrow morning. We'll figure it out." David stared at the message for a long moment before putting his phone away. The weight of what was to come settled in his chest. Tomorrow, they would have to make a decision. Tomorrow, they would have to figure out how to tell Emma the truth. The next morning, David arrived at Michael's house, feeling a mixture of apprehension and determination. He knew this conversation was inevitable, but that didn't make it any easier. Michael opened the door, his expression somber but resolved. "She's at a friend's house for the day," he said, stepping aside to let David in. "We've got time to figure this out." David nodded, stepping into the living room. The house was quiet, almost eerily so, without Emma's usual energy filling the space. They sat down at the kitchen table, both of them knowing what was coming, but unsure how to start. "She's asking about Sarah," David said after a moment, his voice low. "She's starting to notice things. She's not going to stop asking." Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know. I've been thinking about it ever since you texted me. I've always known we'd have to tell her, but I just don't know how." David leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "We can't keep putting it off, Michael. She deserves to know the truth." "I know," Michael said, his voice tight with emotion. "But how do we even start? How do we explain to her that the uncle she's just getting to know is also her blood relative? That her mom was someone we never even knew we had?" David could hear the pain in his brother's voice, the fear that this revelation would somehow shatter the fragile world they had built for Emma. He understood that fear because he felt it too. But he also knew that keeping the truth from her would only make things worse in the long run. "We have to be honest with her," David said softly. "We have to tell her in a way she can understand, but we can't hide this from her anymore. It's not fair to her." Michael was silent for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he nodded, though his expression was still filled with uncertainty. "You're right," he said quietly, "but we need to be careful. We need to make sure we're doing this for her, not for us." David nodded in agreement. "She's the most important thing here." They sat in silence for a while, both of them grappling with the enormity of what they were about to do. It wasn't just about telling Emma the truth. It was about the impact it would have on her, on their family, on everything they had worked so hard to rebuild. You said, continue where you left off. ChatGPT said, "I don't want to hurt her," Michael said, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "She's been through so much already, losing Sarah, and now we're about to turn her world upside down with this." David leaned back in his chair, his heart heavy with the weight of the conversation. "I know, Michael, but hiding the truth isn't protecting her. It's just delaying the inevitable." Michael let out a deep sigh, nodding in reluctant agreement. "So, how do we do this? How do we explain something so complicated to a little girl?" David thought for a moment, his mind racing through all the ways this conversation could go wrong. He had spent so long trying to rebuild the trust between him and Michael, and now they were both about to enter uncharted territory. The one thing they had to do, he realized, was to keep it simple. Emma was only 8. She didn't need the full, messy history all at once. "We keep it simple," David said finally. "We don't have to tell her everything right away. We start by telling her the truth about Sarah, that she was our sister, her mother, and that we didn't know about her until after she was gone." Michael frowned, rubbing the back of his neck. "But won't she ask why we didn't know about Sarah, or why we never mentioned her before?" David nodded. "She probably will. And we'll tell her that it was complicated, that Sarah was given up for adoption before we were born, and we didn't find out about her until later. We don't have to get into all the details right away. We just need to help her understand that the family she thought she had is a little bigger than she realized." Michael's expression softened, but there was still a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "And what about you? About how you're not just her uncle, but her real uncle?" David swallowed hard, the reality of that truth hitting him all over again. It was one thing to know that Emma was his blood relative. It was another to say it out loud, to tell her that their bond was more than what she had been told. "We'll tell her that I'm her uncle by blood," David said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "But that part we'll be gentle about. She's already accepted me as her uncle, so maybe it won't be as hard for her to process. She just needs to know that we're family in more ways than one." Michael nodded slowly, though his expression was still filled with unease. "All right," he said quietly. "But I'm going to need you there when we tell her. I don't want to do this alone." David reached across the table, placing a hand on Michael's shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere, Michael. We'll do this together." The next day, David arrived at Michael's house early in the afternoon. He had barely slept the night before, his mind consumed with the upcoming conversation. The weight of what they were about to do sat heavy on his chest, but he knew it was necessary. Emma needed to know the truth, and delaying it any longer would only make things harder in the long run. Michael greeted him at the door, his face pale and tense. David could tell that his brother had been just as anxious as he was, but there was a quiet determination in his eyes. They were doing this for Emma, and that was all that mattered. "She's in the living room," Michael said, stepping aside to let David in. "She doesn't know anything yet. I figured we'd sit her down together." David nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. "Let's get this over with." They walked into the living room, where Emma was curled up on the couch, watching one of her favorite cartoons. She looked up when they entered, her face lighting up with a wide smile. "Uncle David!" she exclaimed, jumping up and running over to him. "Are you staying for dinner?" David forced a smile, bending down to hug her. "Maybe," he said softly. "But first, we need to talk to you about something important." Emma's smile faltered slightly, and she glanced up at Michael with a questioning look. "What's wrong, Daddy?" Michael walked over and sat down on the couch, patting the spot beside him. "Come sit with me, sweetheart. Your uncle and I need to tell you something." Emma hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking between David and Michael, clearly sensing the seriousness of the situation. She climbed onto the couch beside Michael, her small hands clasped tightly in her lap. David sat down on the other side of her, feeling the tension in the room rise as they prepared to reveal the truth. He glanced at Michael, giving him a small nod to start. Michael took a deep breath, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Emma, you know that I love you more than anything in the world, right?" Emma nodded, her wide eyes fixed on her father. "I know, Daddy," Michael smiled softly, though his eyes were filled with pain. "And you know that your mommy loved you very much too. Even though she's not here with us anymore, she's always with you in your heart." Emma's expression softened at the mention of her mother, but she still seemed confused by the sudden seriousness. "I know, Daddy." Michael hesitated, his gaze flicking to David for support. David took a deep breath and picked up where Michael left off. "Emma, there's something we need to tell you about your mommy. Something that we've been keeping from you because we didn't think you were ready to understand it yet." Emma's brow furrowed, and she looked back and forth between the two men. "What do you mean?" David swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Your mommy, Sarah, wasn't just your daddy's wife. She was also my sister." Emma's eyes widened in surprise, and she stared at David in confusion. "Your sister?" David nodded, trying to keep his voice calm. "Yes, she was my sister, but I didn't know about her until after she had already passed away. She was given up for adoption before your daddy and I were born, and we didn't find out about her until much later." Emma was silent for a long moment, processing the information. Her small hands fidgeted in her lap, and David could see the confusion swirling in her eyes. "So, you're my uncle, but you're also my mommy's brother." David nodded again, his heart aching as he watched her struggle to understand. "That's right. I'm your uncle by blood, Emma. We're family in more ways than one." Emma's gaze dropped to the floor, her little face scrunched up in thought. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Michael leaned in, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We didn't want to confuse you, sweetheart. We wanted to wait until you were ready to hear the truth." Emma was quiet, her eyes still downcast as she absorbed everything they had just told her. David's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for her reaction, unsure of what she would say or how she would feel. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emma looked up at David with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Does this mean you're really my family?" David's throat tightened, and he blinked back his own tears. He reached out, gently taking her small hands in his. "Yes, Emma. I'm really your family, always." Emma stared at him for a moment longer, And then, to David's surprise, she threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. "I'm glad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. David held her close, his heart swelling with emotion. He had been so afraid of how she would react. But in this moment, all that fear melted away. Emma didn't care about the complexities of their family history. All she cared about was that she had someone who loved her, and that was enough. Michael watched the scene unfold, his eyes filled with relief and quiet gratitude. He had been dreading this conversation as much as David had, but seeing the way Emma embraced the truth, he knew they had made the right choice. As they sat together on the couch, holding the little girl who had brought them back together, David realized that they were finally on the path to healing. There were still wounds to mend, still conversations to be had, but this was a start, a real, honest start. And for the first time in a long time, David felt like they could finally move forward together. The days that followed the conversation with Emma were quieter, more reflective. David noticed that the tension between him and Michael seemed to have lessened. There was still a lot to work through, but the hardest part, the truth, was finally out in the open. And Emma, in her innocent, open-hearted way, had accepted it with far more grace than either of them had expected. She still asked questions from time to time, curious about her mother, about the family history she hadn't known about before. But for the most part, Emma seemed content to accept that her uncle was not just a distant relative, but someone who shared her blood, her lineage. In her mind, the idea of family was simple. It was the people who loved you, who showed up for you, and that was enough. For David, however, the revelation still weighed heavily on his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about Sarah, the sister he never knew. It wasn't just about the lost time or the missed opportunities to get to know her. It was about the fact that Sarah had been part of Michael's life, even if only briefly, and David hadn't even known she existed. The thought gnawed at him, a constant reminder of how far he had distanced himself from his family over the years. One afternoon, a few days after they had told Emma the truth, David found himself sitting at the edge of his pool, staring out over the water. He had been spending more time at home lately, pulling back from work commitments, distancing himself from the business world that had once consumed him. Rachel, his assistant, had noticed the shift, though she didn't press him about it. She was used to his erratic schedule, but David knew that sooner or later he would have to explain why he was pulling back from the company. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the pool, David's phone buzzed on the table beside him. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from Michael. "You free for dinner?" David smiled faintly and texted back, "Yeah, I'll be over in 30. When David arrived at Michael's house, the smell of something delicious wafted through the open windows. He knocked on the door, and a moment later, Emma opened it, grinning up at him with excitement. "Uncle David," she exclaimed, grabbing his hand and pulling him inside. "We're making spaghetti again." David chuckled as she dragged him into the kitchen, where Michael was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of sauce. "I see you've got your hands full," David said, giving Michael a nod. Michael smirked, glancing over at Emma. "She's been demanding spaghetti all week. I figured it was about time we gave in." Emma beamed, clearly proud of her influence over the dinner menu. "It's my favorite," she declared, bouncing on her heels. David smiled, his heart swelling at the sight of her. She had such an infectious energy, and being around her made everything feel lighter, easier. He was grateful for that, grateful for her. "Why don't you go set the table, Emma?" Michael suggested, handing her a stack of plates. "Dinner's almost ready." Emma grabbed the plates and skipped off to the dining room, leaving David and Michael alone in the kitchen. The two brothers stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of sizzling sauce and clinking silverware filling the space. Finally, Michael turned to David, his expression thoughtful. "How are you holding up? After everything with Emma, I mean." David leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "I'm okay," he said after a moment. "It's a lot to process, But I'm glad we told her. She deserved to know. Michael nodded, his gaze distant as he stirred the sauce. Yeah, I've been thinking about that too. I was so scared of how she'd react, but she's handled it better than I expected. She's strong, David said, a note of pride in his voice. She gets that from you. Michael smiled faintly, though there was still a shadow of something in his expression. Something unspoken, unresolved. David could see it in the way his brother's shoulders were slightly tense, in the way his hands gripped the spoon just a little too tightly. You still thinking about Sarah? David asked gently, sensing the weight that was still pressing on Michael. Michael's grip on the spoon tightened for a moment before he set it down with a sigh. Yeah, he admitted, his voice quiet. I think about her every day. I think about what could have been, what we missed out on, and I think about how unfair it was that she didn't get to know you. David's heart ached at the words. I wish I had known her too, he said softly. I feel like I missed out on so much. Michael nodded, his jaw tightening as he stared down at the counter. It's hard, you know, losing her. It was like losing a part of myself. I never got to say goodbye. David swallowed hard, the pain in his brother's voice hitting him like a punch to the gut. I'm sorry, Michael. I wish I could have been there for you. I wish I could have been there for both of you. Michael shook his head, his expression softening. It's not your fault, David. We didn't even know about her until it was too late. But still, I think about it all the time. What could have been different? David nodded, understanding the weight of that regret. Me too. For a moment, they stood in silence, the shared grief of losing a sister they barely knew hanging heavy between them. It wasn't the kind of grief that could be easily expressed or resolved. It was the kind that lingered, a constant presence in the background of their lives. I've been thinking, Michael said after a long pause, his voice quiet. Maybe we should do something for her, like a memorial or something. I don't know, something to honor her memory. David blinked, surprised by the suggestion. A memorial? Michael shrugged, his gaze distant. I just feel like we never got a chance to say goodbye. Not properly, and I think maybe it would help for both of us. David considered the idea, his heart heavy with the thought of it. A memorial for Sarah, a way to honor the sister they never knew, the woman who had brought them back together in a way neither of them had expected. I think that's a good idea, David said softly. She deserves that. Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. Yeah, she does. They fell into silence again, but this time it wasn't filled with tension or unresolved emotions. It was a peaceful silence, a shared understanding that they were both working through their grief, their regrets, and the tangled history of their family. After dinner, as they sat around the table, Emma chattered on about her latest school project, completely unaware of the heavy conversation her father and uncle had just shared. Her innocence was a reminder to both men of what was most important, moving forward, together, as a family. David watched Emma with a quiet smile, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. For so long, he had been running from his family, from his past, from the mistakes he had made. But now, sitting here with Michael and Emma, he realized that he didn't have to run anymore. He was exactly where he needed to be. Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Michael and David sat together on the front porch, the cool night air wrapping around them like a comforting blanket. They talked about everything and nothing, the way brothers do when the weight of the world feels just a little lighter. And for the first time in a long time, David felt like they were finally heading in the right direction. In the weeks that followed, Michael and David began planning the memorial for Sarah. It was a quiet, personal event, just the two of them, standing by the river where Michael and Sarah had spent so much time together. They shared stories, memories, and moments of silence, honoring the sister they had lost and the family they were trying to rebuild. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it didn't need to be. It was about healing, about finding a way to move forward while carrying the memory of Sarah with them. And in that quiet, intimate moment, David felt a sense of closure that he hadn't realized he needed. As they stood by the river, watching the water flow gently past, Michael turned to David with a small smile. "I think she'd be proud of us," he said quietly. David smiled, his heart full. "Yeah, I think so too." They stood there in peaceful silence for a while longer. The sound of the river, a soothing backdrop to the moment of reflection. And for the first time in years, David felt like he was no longer running. He was exactly where he belonged. The quiet peace that had settled over David's life following Sarah's memorial was something he hadn't expected to last. For weeks, he had reveled in the new sense of stability, the routine of being there for Emma, the shared moments with Michael, the slowly rebuilding trust between them. It all felt fragile but real. David had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of family life, where the complications of his past didn't feel as pressing as they once had. But life, David knew all too well, rarely followed the path of least resistance. One Thursday morning, David was sitting at his kitchen table, sipping his coffee and scrolling through emails. It was a rare, quiet moment before the day began, and he was planning to meet Michael and Emma later that afternoon for one of Emma's soccer practices. His phone buzzed with a text, interrupting his peaceful routine. The message was from Rachel, his assistant. "There's someone here asking to see you. She says it's urgent. Should I send her away?" David frowned, surprised. He wasn't expecting anyone, and Rachel knew not to disturb him on personal days. He quickly typed back, "Who is it?" Rachel's reply came moments later. "She says her name is Lindsay, claims it's personal." The name hit David like a brick. Lindsay. It had been years since he'd last heard that name. A whirlwind from a different time in his life, from a chapter he had thought was firmly closed. He hadn't seen or spoken to her in nearly a decade, since the days when he was at the height of his success, and relationships were just another complication he didn't have time for. David stared at the screen, his mind racing with questions. What could she possibly want after all this time? And why now? Without thinking too much about it, he typed back, "I'll be there in 10 minutes. He stood up, grabbed his keys, and headed out the door, his mind buzzing with the unexpected arrival. As he drove to the office, memories of Lindsay flooded back. Memories he had pushed to the back of his mind for years. They had met at one of his company's early events, back when he was young and hungry for success. Lindsay had been smart, ambitious, and completely unafraid to challenge him. They had connected instantly, but it was a brief, intense relationship that ended just as quickly as it had begun. David had moved on, buried himself in work, and eventually lost touch with her entirely. Now, all these years later, she was back, and David had no idea why. When he arrived at the office, Rachel was waiting for him at the reception desk. She gave him a knowing look as he stepped out of the elevator, her expression unreadable. "She's waiting in the conference room," Rachel said quietly. "She wouldn't say what this was about, just that she needed to see you." David nodded, his stomach tight with anxiety. "Thanks, Rachel." He made his way to the conference room, each step heavier than the last. As he opened the door, he saw her immediately. Lindsay, sitting at the long table, looking almost exactly the same as he remembered. Her auburn hair was shorter now, and there was a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. But she still had that same confident presence that had always drawn him in. "Lindsay," David said, closing the door behind him. "I wasn't expecting to see you." Lindsay looked up, her eyes locking onto his. "David," she said softly, "it's been a long time." David sat down across from her, his heart racing with the weight of unspoken words. He had no idea what to expect from this conversation, but he knew that whatever had brought her here couldn't be simple. "It has," David replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "What brings you here?" Lindsay hesitated for a moment, her gaze dropping to the table. She seemed to be struggling with something, as if she wasn't sure where to begin. Finally, she looked up, her expression serious. "I wouldn't have come if it wasn't important," she said quietly. "There's something you need to know." David frowned, his anxiety deepening. "What is it?" Lindsay took a deep breath, her eyes searching his as she spoke. It's about my son, David. He's 8 years old." David blinked. the words not quite registering at first. "Your son," he repeated, confused. Lindsay nodded, her expression pained. "His name is Ethan. And David, he's your son too." The air seemed to leave the room in an instant. David stared at Lindsay, his mind struggling to process the words that had just come out of her mouth. "Your son." It felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. The calm, ordered life he had worked so hard to rebuild suddenly felt like it was crumbling around him. I don't understand," David stammered, his heart racing. How is this possible?" Lindsay sighed, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together on the table. "I found out I was pregnant shortly after we ended things. I thought about telling you, but you were so focused on your career, on building your company. I didn't want to complicate things for you." David's chest tightened with a mixture of shock and anger. "So you just didn't tell me? You kept this from me for 8 years?" Lindsay's eyes filled with guilt. "I thought I was doing the right thing at the time. I didn't think you wanted that kind of responsibility. But as Ethan's gotten older, I've realized that he deserves to know his father, and you deserve to know him." David leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair as he tried to process everything. A son. He had a son he never knew about. The revelation felt like a punch to the gut, and for a moment he didn't know what to say, what to feel. "Why now?" David asked, his voice quiet but laced with frustration. "Why come to me after all these years?" Lindsay's gaze dropped to the table again. "Because Ethan's been asking questions. He knows he doesn't have a dad in his life, and it's starting to affect him. I couldn't keep lying to him. He deserves to know the truth, David." David's mind raced with 1,000 questions. He had spent the past few months trying to rebuild his relationship with Michael and Emma, trying to create a new life for himself. And now, out of nowhere, this bombshell had dropped into his lap. I don't know what to say," David admitted, his voice strained. "I never wanted this to happen. I never knew." Lindsay nodded, her expression filled with regret. "I know, and I'm sorry, David. I should have told you sooner." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the revelation hanging between them. David felt like his world had been turned upside down in a matter of minutes, and he had no idea how to move forward from this. Finally, Lindsay spoke again, her voice tentative. "I'm not asking for anything from you, David. I'm not asking you to step in and take over. I thought you deserved to know." David nodded slowly, his mind still reeling. "I need time to think," he said quietly. "This is a lot." Lindsay stood up, her expression understanding. "I get that. Take all the time you need. I just wanted to do what was right." David watched as she walked to the door, his heart heavy with the weight of everything she had just told him. Before she left, Lindsay turned back to face him. "Ethan's a great kid, David. He deserves to know you, and I think you'd love him if you gave him a chance." With that, she left, leaving David alone in the conference room, his mind racing with thoughts of a child he had never known existed. That night, David sat on his couch, staring blankly at the wall. His mind was still spinning from the revelation, and he couldn't seem to make sense of it. He had spent so much time trying to rebuild his relationship with Michael and Emma, trying to make up for the years he had lost with them. And now, there was another piece of his life that had been hidden from him, another family connection he hadn't known about. He had a son, an 8-year-old boy named Ethan. The thought was overwhelming, and David wasn't sure how to process it. What did this mean for him, for his relationship with Michael and Emma? How could he suddenly step into the role of a father when he hadn't even known the child existed? David leaned forward, resting his head in his hands as the weight of it all pressed down on him. He had spent so long running from his past, from the mistakes he had made, and now it felt like the past was catching up with him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to move forward from this. But one thing was clear: his life would never be the same again. The revelation that David had a son weighed on him like an anchor. Every moment of his day was consumed by the thought of Ethan, a child he never knew existed. a child who had been growing up without him for 8 years. His mind was tangled in questions. What kind of father would he be? How would Michael and Emma react to this? Would Ethan even want him in his life? For days, David avoided telling anyone about the conversation with Lindsay. He needed time to sort through his feelings, to figure out what this meant for his life. But even as he tried to process everything, he knew that he couldn't keep this from Michael and Emma. They had to know, especially after everything they had been through together. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his family and how this new reality would impact them all. By the end of the week, David knew he couldn't delay the inevitable any longer. He had to tell Michael. That evening, David drove to Michael's house, his stomach twisted with anxiety. He had been dreading this conversation, knowing that it would disrupt the fragile peace they had worked so hard to rebuild. But he also knew that honesty was the only way forward. Michael deserved to know the truth, just like Emma had. When he arrived, Michael was in the backyard, grilling dinner while Emma played with the family dog. The smell of barbecue filled the air, a comforting reminder of the simple moments they had shared over the past few months. "Hey, David!" Michael called out, waving him over as David stepped out of the car. "You hungry? We've got plenty." David forced a smile as he walked toward them, but his heart felt heavy. "Thanks, but I'm not really here for dinner." Michael frowned, picking up on the seriousness in David's tone. "Everything all right?" David glanced at Emma, who was giggling as the dog chased a ball across the yard. She was so happy, so carefree, and for a moment David considered putting off the conversation for another day, but he knew he couldn't. "Can we talk?" David asked quietly. "In private?" Michael's expression shifted from confusion to concern. He nodded, setting down the tongs and leading David inside, away from Emma's playful laughter. They sat down at the kitchen table, and David felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he'd had when they had told Emma the truth about Sarah. This was a different kind of conversation, but the stakes felt just as high. Michael looked at him, his eyes filled with quiet worry. "What's going on, David? You're acting strange." David took a deep breath, steadying himself before he spoke. "There's something I need to tell you, something that I just found out, and I don't know how to handle it." Michael's brow furrowed. "Okay, what is it?" David stared down at the table, his hands clenched into fists. The words were hard to say, but he knew there was no turning back now. "A few days ago, someone from my past showed up. Her name is Lindsay. I knew her years ago, back when I was building my company." Michael nodded slowly, waiting for David to continue. "She told me something that I didn't expect," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She has a son, an 8-year-old boy, and Michael, he's mine." Michael's eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening slightly as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "You have a son?" he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. David nodded, feeling the weight of the truth settle over him. "I didn't know about him. Lindsay never told me she was pregnant, but now she says Ethan, that's his name, has been asking questions about his dad, and she wants me to be a part of his life." Michael stared at David for a long moment, his expression unreadable. David could see the storm of emotions flickering in his brother's eyes, shock, confusion, and something else, something deeper. "I don't know what to do," David admitted, his voice trembling. "I've spent all this time trying to rebuild my relationship with you and Emma, and now this changes everything." Michael leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "David, I don't even know what to say. You have a son, and you never knew." David nodded. "I had no idea. Lindsay kept it from me because she thought I didn't want the responsibility. And now, after all these years, she's come back and dropped this bombshell on me." Michael was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant as he processed the news. David could see the wheels turning in his brother's mind, the way he was trying to make sense of everything. "Does Emma know?" Michael asked finally, his voice quieter now. "No," David said quickly. "I haven't told her yet. I wanted to talk to you first." Michael let out a long breath, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. This is a lot to take in, David. I mean, we've been through so much already, and now this. How do you even begin to introduce him into your life, into our lives? David shook his head, his hands trembling slightly as he rested them on the table. I don't know. I have no idea how to handle this, but I can't ignore it. I can't pretend like he doesn't exist. Michael nodded slowly, his expression softening. No, you can't. But you need to think about how this will affect everything else. You've been building something with Emma and me, and now you're going to have to find a way to balance that with this new responsibility. David felt the weight of his brother's words, the unspoken warning that lay beneath them. He had worked so hard to reconnect with Michael and Emma, to be part of their lives again. And now, the arrival of Ethan threatened to upend everything. I don't want to lose what we've built, David said softly, his voice thick with emotion. But I also can't turn my back on my son. Michael's gaze softened, and he reached across the table, placing a hand on David's arm. You're not going to lose us, David, but you're right. You can't walk away from this. You have to figure out how to be there for Ethan too. David looked up at his brother, gratitude swelling in his chest. Michael had every reason to be angry, to resent this new complication in their lives, but instead, he was offering understanding. A reminder that they were family, no matter how complicated things became. I don't even know where to start, David admitted. I've never been a father. I don't know how to be one. Michael smiled faintly. No one does at first, but you'll figure it out, and you won't be doing it alone. David felt a lump form in his throat, the emotion of the moment overwhelming him. Thanks, Michael. I don't know what I'd do without you. Michael squeezed his arm before pulling back, his expression serious again. You'll have to tell Emma soon. She's not going to understand why things are different unless you're honest with her. David nodded, the weight of that conversation pressing down on him. I know. I'll tell her. A few days later, David sat down with Emma to have the conversation he had been dreading. She had been talking about school, telling him about a new friend she had made, completely unaware of the serious discussion that was about to unfold. Emma, David said softly, interrupting her story. There's something I need to talk to you about, something important. Emma looked up at him, her eyes wide with curiosity. What is it, Uncle David? David took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. Do you remember when we talked about your mom and how sometimes there are things that are hard to understand about family? Emma nodded slowly, her expression growing more serious. Well, there's something else I need to tell you, David continued, his heart pounding. You know how much I love you, right? And how I'm always going to be here for you. Emma nodded again, her brow furrowed in confusion. Yeah, I know. David swallowed hard, his throat tight. There's someone else I've just found out about, someone I didn't know existed before. I have a son, Emma. His name is Ethan. He's about your age. Emma's eyes widened in surprise, and she stared at David, clearly trying to process what he had just said. You have a son, she repeated, her voice small. David nodded, his heart aching at the uncertainty in her voice. Yes, I didn't know about him until recently, but now that I do, I want to be a part of his life, just like I am a part of yours. Emma was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the floor as she absorbed the news. David could see the confusion in her eyes, the way her mind was trying to make sense of this new reality. Does that mean you won't have time for me anymore? She asked quietly, her voice trembling with fear. David's heart shattered at the question. He knelt down in front of her, taking her small hands in his. No, Emma, I will always have time for you. You're my niece, and I love you more than anything. Ethan doesn't change that. You're still just as important to me. Emma stared at him for a moment, her eyes filling with tears. Promise. David smiled softly, pulling her into a tight hug. I promise. You'll always be my Emma. Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed, David sat alone in the living room, reflecting on everything that had happened. Telling Emma the truth had been hard, but she had accepted it in her own way. just as she had accepted the truth about Sarah. She was strong, stronger than David had ever given her credit for. But now he had to face the next step, meeting Ethan. It was a reality that still felt surreal to him, but one he knew he couldn't avoid. He was a father now, and no matter how unprepared he felt, he knew he had to step up. He had to be there for Ethan, just as he had promised to be there for Emma. No more running, no more hiding. It was time to face his new reality, one day at a time. The day David had been dreading finally arrived. It had been a week since Lindsay had come back into his life and revealed the existence of his son, Ethan. During that time, David had tried to prepare himself mentally for the inevitable meeting, but nothing seemed to settle the nerves that gnawed at him. No matter how many times he thought through what he would say or how he would act, there was no escaping the weight of this moment. He was about to meet the child he hadn't known existed for 8 years. Lindsay had been understanding, giving David space to process everything. They had exchanged a few texts, but David hadn't rushed into setting up the meeting. He needed time to wrap his head around the reality of being a father, time to figure out how this would fit into his already complicated life. But now, the time for thinking was over. David had agreed to meet Ethan at a park near Lindsay's house. It was a neutral setting, somewhere familiar to Ethan, but less overwhelming than David's large, empty mansion. Lindsay had reassured him that Ethan was excited to meet him, but that only added to David's anxiety. How could he live up to this child's expectations? How could he be a father when he had spent years not even knowing he had a son? As David drove to the park, his heart pounded in his chest. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the road ahead, but David barely noticed the beauty of the day. His thoughts were consumed by the meeting that was about to happen. When he arrived at the park, he parked his car and sat for a moment, staring out at the families playing on the grassy field. Children laughed and chased each other. Parents watched from benches or picnicked nearby. It all seemed so normal, so simple, and yet for David, it felt like he was about to step into a world he didn't quite belong in. After a few deep breaths, he finally got out of the car and made his way toward the playground area where Lindsay had said they would be. His hands were sweating and his stomach churned with nervous energy. He scanned the park, looking for any sign of them, and then, near the swings, he saw them. Lindsay stood next to a young boy with tousled brown hair who was climbing onto one of the swings. David's breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight of Ethan. He looked so much like him, there was no denying it. The resemblance was uncanny, even from a distance. Lindsay spotted David first, and she waved him over with a small, encouraging smile. David swallowed hard and forced his legs to move, each step feeling heavier than the last as he made his way toward them. When he reached the swings, Lindsay stepped forward, her voice soft but filled with warmth. "David, this is Ethan." Ethan, who had been focused on trying to get the swing to move, looked up at David with wide, curious eyes. For a moment, David wasn't sure what to say. All the words he had rehearsed in his mind disappeared, leaving him standing there, feeling completely unprepared for the enormity of the situation. "Hi," David said finally, his voice slightly shaky. "You must be Ethan." The boy nodded, his eyes studying David with a mixture of curiosity and shyness. "Yeah, are you my dad?" David's heart skipped a beat at the question, the simple truth of it hitting him all over again. "Yeah," he said softly. "I'm your dad." Ethan stared at him for a moment longer, as if trying to process the reality of it. Then, without warning, he smiled. A bright, genuine smile that made David's heart ache with a mixture of relief and emotion. "Cool," Ethan said simply, his tone matter-of-fact, as if meeting his father for the first time was just another event in his day. David let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, and a small smile tugged at his lips. "Yeah, it is cool." Lindsay watched the exchange from a few steps away, giving them space but keeping a close eye on Ethan. She had told David that Ethan was excited to meet him, but she had also warned that he might be nervous, unsure of how to act. But as David stood there, looking at his son, he felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. This was it. This was real. "Do you want to push me?" Ethan asked, gesturing to the swing. David blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the simple request. "Yeah, sure," he said, moving behind the swing. As he began gently pushing Ethan, the boy laughed, kicking his legs to gain momentum. It was such a normal, everyday moment, and yet for David it felt monumental. Here he was, pushing his son on a swing, something he had never imagined himself doing just weeks ago. The absurdity of it almost made him laugh, but instead he just focused on the sound of Ethan's laughter, letting it soothe his nerves. Lindsay watched quietly from the sidelines, her expression soft. David knew she was giving him space to bond with Ethan, but there was also a part of her that was watching, assessing how this was going to unfold. David appreciated her patience, but he couldn't help but wonder what was going through her mind. This was just as complicated for her as it was for him. After a few minutes, Ethan slowed the swing down and hopped off, running over to a nearby patch of grass. He picked up a soccer ball that had been lying there and kicked it toward David. "Want to play?" Ethan asked, his eyes lighting up with excitement. David smiled, grateful for the distraction from his racing thoughts. "Sure." For the next half hour, David and Ethan kicked the ball back and forth across the grass, with Ethan's laughter filling the air as he chased after it. David marveled at how easily Ethan accepted him, how quickly they had fallen into a rhythm, despite the years of absence. At one point, Lindsay joined in, and for a moment, the three of them felt like a family. It was a strange, unexpected feeling, one that David hadn't been prepared for. He had spent so much time focused on his relationship with Michael and Emma that he hadn't considered what it would be like to form a bond with Ethan and Lindsay. But now, standing here, watching Ethan's joy and feeling the warmth of Lindsay's presence, David realized that his life was about to become even more complicated and maybe even fuller than he had ever imagined. Later, as the sun began to set, they sat on a bench, watching the last few families at the park pack up to leave. Ethan, tired from all the running around, leaned against Lindsay, his eyes half closed with exhaustion. Lindsay glanced at David, her voice quiet as she spoke. "He had a great time today." David nodded, his heart full. "Yeah, so did I." Lindsay smiled softly, but there was a seriousness in her eyes. "I know this is all new for you, David. I know it's a lot to take in, but Ethan, he's been waiting for this for a long time. He's always known there was something missing, even if he didn't fully understand what it was." David looked down at Ethan, who was drifting off to sleep against his mother's shoulder. A pang of guilt shot through him as he thought about all the years he had missed, all the moments he hadn't been there for. "I want to be there for him," David said quietly. "I don't know what kind of father I'll be, but I want to try." Lindsay's expression softened, and she nodded. "That's all he needs, David, just you being here." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting the park in a soft, golden light. It was a peaceful moment, one that felt like the beginning of something new, something that, while uncertain, held the promise of connection and healing. David knew that there would be challenges ahead, that balancing his relationship with Ethan alongside his commitments to Michael and Emma wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging that he hadn't felt in years. As the sky darkened and the park emptied, David stood up, offering to help Lindsay carry Ethan to the car. She smiled gratefully, and together they gently lifted the sleeping boy, careful not to wake him. When they reached the car, Lindsay buckled Ethan into the back seat, her movements careful and practiced. She turned to David, her expression a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "I wasn't sure how it would go, but I think it went well." David smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "Yeah, I think it did." They stood there for a moment, the quiet night wrapping around them, before Lindsay finally got into the car. As she pulled away, David watched them disappear into the distance, his mind swirling with thoughts of the future. This was just the beginning of something unexpected, something new. But as David stood there in the fading light, he realized that for the first time in a long time, he wasn't running anymore. He was ready to face whatever came next. The days following David's first meeting with Ethan were a whirlwind of emotions. He hadn't expected the bond to form so quickly, nor had he anticipated how much joy Ethan would bring into his life. But as David replayed the memories of their time at the park, he felt an overwhelming sense of both gratitude and guilt. Gratitude for having the chance to know his son, and guilt for the years he hadn't been there. Balancing his new role as a father with his commitment to Michael and Emma was proving to be more complicated than David had expected. He hadn't told Emma about Ethan yet, and while Michael knew, David could sense that his brother was still processing the news. Michael had been supportive, but there was an underlying tension, one that David could feel in the quieter moments of their conversations. They were both trying to navigate this new reality, but it wasn't easy. David knew that soon he would have to bring Ethan into the life he had built with Michael and Emma. They were family now, in the most unexpected and complicated way. And as much as David wanted to protect the delicate balance they had found, he knew that keeping Ethan separate from them wasn't sustainable. One evening, David found himself at Michael's house for dinner. Emma was in the living room, playing with her toys, while Michael and David sat at the kitchen table, picking at the remains of their meal. The conversation had been light, but David could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Michael finally broke the silence. "How's it going with Ethan?" David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's good. Better than I expected. Honestly, he's a great kid, Michael. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that he's mine." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I'm glad it's going well, but how do you see this playing out with Emma? I mean..." David looked down at his hands, his heart heavy with the question. "I don't know. I haven't told her about Ethan yet. I wanted to make sure things were solid between me and him before I brought him into her life." Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward, his eyes searching David's. "You can't keep them apart forever. Emma's going to find out eventually, and she deserves to know the truth, just like she deserved to know about Sarah." David's chest tightened at the mention of Sarah. He knew Michael was right. But the thought of having that conversation with Emma, of adding another layer of complexity to her life, filled him with dread. "I know," David said quietly. "I'm just trying to figure out how to do it without overwhelming her." Michael nodded, his expression softening. "She's stronger than you think, David. She'll be okay, but she needs to hear it from you." David stared at the table, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had worked so hard to rebuild his relationship with Emma, to be a part of her life again, and now he was about to introduce something new, something that could change everything. Maybe we could all meet," David suggested hesitantly. "I don't want to force anything, but I think if Emma gets to know Ethan slowly, it might be easier for her." Michael raised an eyebrow. "You mean like a family dinner?" David smiled faintly. "Yeah. Something like that." Michael considered the idea for a moment before nodding. "That could work, but we'll need to be careful. Emma's sensitive, and we don't want to rush her into anything." David let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thanks, Michael. I know this isn't easy for you either." Michael smiled softly, though there was still a hint of tension in his eyes. "It's not easy, but it's life, and we're family, David. We'll figure it out." A few days later, David decided it was time. He sat down with Emma after school, his heart pounding as he prepared to tell her about Ethan. She was sitting on the couch, coloring in one of her favorite books, completely unaware of the serious conversation that was about to unfold. "Emma," David said softly, sitting down beside her, "there's something I need to talk to you about." Emma looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with curiosity. "What is it, Uncle David?" David swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. "Do you remember when we talked about family And how sometimes there are things about our family that are hard to understand? Emma nodded slowly, her expression serious now. Well, David continued, his heart racing, there's something else I need to tell you, something important. Emma put down her coloring book and looked up at him, her eyes full of trust. Okay. What is it? David took a deep breath. I found out that I have a son. His name is Ethan, and he's about your age. Emma's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. David could see the gears turning in her mind, trying to make sense of this new information. You have a son? She asked quietly, her voice filled with confusion. David nodded, his heart aching at the uncertainty in her voice. Yes, I do. I didn't know about him until recently, but now that I do, I want him to be a part of our family, just like you are. Emma stared at him for a long moment, her little face scrunched up in thought. Does that mean I have a cousin? David smiled softly. Yes, you do. Ethan's your cousin. Emma's brow furrowed, and she looked down at her hands, clearly trying to process everything. Will I get to meet him? David's chest tightened at the question. He hadn't been sure how Emma would react, but the fact that she was asking to meet Ethan gave him hope. Yes, if you want to, we can have dinner together and you can get to know him. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she looked up at David with those wide, innocent eyes. Okay, she said softly. I'd like that. David smiled, pulling her into a gentle hug. I'm glad, Emma. I think you'll like Ethan. He's a lot of fun. Emma hugged him back, and for a moment, David felt a sense of relief wash over him. The conversation hadn't been as difficult as he had feared, and Emma's openness to the idea of meeting Ethan gave him hope that they could navigate this new chapter together. The following weekend, David arranged a small dinner at his house, inviting Lindsay and Ethan over to meet Michael and Emma. It was a casual gathering, but the weight of the occasion wasn't lost on David. This was the first time their two worlds would collide, and he had no idea how it would go. When Lindsay and Ethan arrived, David greeted them at the door, his heart pounding with nervous energy. Ethan looked up at him with a shy smile, and David ruffled his hair, feeling a warmth spread through him. Inside, Michael and Emma were already seated at the table, the smell of dinner wafting through the air. Emma sat quietly, her eyes wide with curiosity, as she watched Ethan enter the room. For a moment, there was a tense silence, as if everyone was waiting to see how the kids would react. Ethan, ever the ball of energy, broke the silence by walking over to Emma and holding out his hand. Hi, I'm Ethan. Emma blinked in surprise, then slowly reached out to shake his hand. Hi, I'm Emma. For a moment, the two kids just stared at each other, as if sizing each other up. Then, to David's relief, Ethan grinned and plopped down in the seat beside Emma. Do you like soccer? Emma's eyes lit up at the question. Yeah, do you play? Ethan nodded enthusiastically. I love it. I've been playing since I was little. Emma smiled, and just like that, the tension seemed to melt away. The two kids began chatting excitedly about soccer, their voices filling the room with the easy laughter of childhood. David exchanged a relieved glance with Michael, who smiled faintly, his eyes filled with understanding. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As the evening wore on, the conversation flowed more naturally. Lindsay and Michael chatted quietly, finding common ground in their shared role as parents, while David watched the kids, marveling at how easily they had connected. For the first time in weeks, David felt a sense of peace settle over him. The complicated web of relationships that had formed around him was still fragile, but tonight had proven that they could make it work. They could be a family, however unconventional that family might be. Later that night, after Lindsay and Ethan had left and Emma had gone to bed, Michael and David sat on the porch, sipping beers and watching the stars. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the quiet understanding that they were both navigating uncharted territory. You did good today, Michael said after a while, his voice quiet but filled with approval. David smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. Thanks. I wasn't sure how it would go, but I think it went well. Michael nodded, taking a sip of his beer. It's not going to be easy, David, but you're doing the right thing for Ethan and for Emma. David looked up at the stars, the weight of the day settling on him. He knew there were still challenges ahead, still conversations to be had and relationships to be built. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. I hope so, David said quietly. I just want to get this right. Michael smiled softly, his eyes reflecting the same quiet determination. You will. Just take it one day at a time. David nodded, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. One day at a time, that was all he could do. The days following the dinner felt like a turning point for David. The once tenuous and fragile connections between Ethan, Emma, and the rest of the family were slowly beginning to solidify. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of awkwardness, questions that hung in the air unanswered, but it was progress. And for the first time in years, David felt like he was truly building something meaningful, something lasting. Emma, ever curious and eager to learn, had taken to Ethan much faster than David had expected. The two children, despite being from different worlds, shared an unspoken bond that seemed to grow with every passing day. They played soccer together in the backyard, shared stories about school, and quickly fell into the easy rhythm of childhood friendship. Watching them together filled David with a sense of hope and relief. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the family he had always longed for was finally taking shape, but the challenges weren't over. David knew that the complexities of his relationships with Michael, Lindsay, and even Ethan would require careful navigation. There were still conversations to be had, still emotions to process. Most of all, there was the question of how he could truly be the father Ethan needed while also being present for Emma. One afternoon, a few weeks after the dinner, David found himself standing in his backyard, watching as Ethan and Emma chased each other around the garden. Their laughter echoed through the air, and for a moment, everything felt right. The sun was shining, the air was warm, and the children's joy was infectious. As he watched them play, Lindsay stepped outside, joining him by the edge of the yard. She smiled as she watched the children, but there was a quiet thoughtfulness in her expression. They're getting along really well, Lindsay said softly, her voice warm but tinged with the same uncertainty that had been lingering between them since the day they reconnected. David nodded, his eyes never leaving the children. Yeah, better than I could have hoped. Lindsay sighed, folding her arms as she looked up at him. Ethan's been asking more questions about you, she admitted after a moment. He's curious. He wants to know more about where you've been all these years. David's heart clenched at the mention of it. He had been dreading this, dreading the inevitable moment when Ethan would start asking the difficult questions. Why hadn't he been there? Why had it taken so long for them to meet? What have you told him? David asked, his voice low, a mixture of fear and guilt seeping into his words. Lindsay shrugged lightly, though her eyes were filled with concern. I've been honest with him, in a way he can understand. I told him that you didn't know about him until recently, and that it wasn't your fault, but he's still trying to make sense of it. He's been wondering why you weren't there when he was younger. David felt a lump form in his throat, the weight of that question pressing down on him. He hadn't been there for Ethan's first steps, his first words, his first day of school. He had missed so much, too much, and there was no way to change that. I don't know how to explain it to him, David said quietly. How do I tell him that I wasn't there because I didn't even know he existed? Lindsay looked at him, her expression softening with understanding. You tell him the truth. That's all you can do. David nodded slowly, his mind racing. He knew she was right. Ethan deserved the truth, but the truth was messy, and David wasn't sure how much Ethan could handle. He wanted to protect his son from the pain of feeling abandoned, but he also knew that honesty was the only way forward. I'll talk to him, David said after a moment. I'll tell him everything. Lindsay smiled gently, her hand resting briefly on his arm. You're doing fine, David. Just take it one step at a time. That evening, after the kids had gone inside, David sat with Ethan in the living room, the weight of the upcoming conversation heavy in the air. Ethan was sitting on the floor, playing with a toy car, completely unaware of the serious discussion that was about to take place. "Ethan," David began, his voice soft but steady. "Can we talk for a minute?" Ethan looked up at him, his eyes wide and curious. "Yeah?" David took a deep breath, bracing himself for the words he knew would be difficult to say. "I know you've been wondering why I wasn't there when you were little, and I think it's time we talked about that." Ethan's expression grew more serious, and he set the toy car down, his attention fully focused on David. "Mom said you didn't know about me." David nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. "That's right. I didn't know. If I had known, I would have been there, Ethan. I would have been with you from the very beginning." Ethan frowned, clearly trying to process the explanation. "But why didn't you know?" David hesitated, searching for the right words. "Your mom and we weren't together when she found out she was going to have you. She didn't tell me, and I didn't know until just recently. That's why I wasn't there for you when you were younger. But now that I know, I want to be part of your life. I want to make up for the time we lost." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his eyes wide with understanding, but still filled with the confusion of a child trying to grasp the complexities of adult decisions. "So, it wasn't your fault?" David's chest tightened at the question. He wanted to say yes, to tell Ethan that none of this had been his fault. But part of him felt responsible for the choices he had made in his younger years, for the distance he had created in his life that had led to this moment. "No," David said softly, "it wasn't anyone's fault, but I still wish I had been there for you." Ethan looked down at his hands, his little face scrunched up in thought. "I'm glad you're here now," he said quietly. David's heart swelled at the words, and he pulled Ethan into a hug, holding him close. "Me too, buddy, me too." As they sat there, wrapped in each other's embrace, David felt a sense of relief wash over him. The conversation hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. And now, for the first time, he felt like he and Ethan were truly beginning to understand each other. The following weeks brought a new sense of normalcy to David's life. His relationship with Ethan continued to grow, and the bond between Ethan and Emma strengthened as well. The two children became inseparable, spending hours playing together and sharing their favorite games and stories. For David, watching them was a source of constant joy, a reminder that despite all the challenges, they were building something real. Michael, too, seemed to have found a place of acceptance. He and Lindsay had struck up a friendly rapport, and while the dynamics of their extended family were still evolving, there was an underlying sense of unity that had begun to take shape. They were all figuring it out together, step by step. One evening, as David sat on the porch with Michael, the two of them watching the sunset in comfortable silence, Michael turned to him, his expression thoughtful. "You've come a long way, you know that," Michael said, his voice filled with a quiet pride. David smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "Yeah, it feels good, like things are finally falling into place." Michael nodded, taking a sip of his beer. "It's not perfect, but it's real, and that's what matters." David leaned back in his chair, letting the peacefulness of the moment wash over him. He knew there were still challenges ahead, still moments of uncertainty, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. "You were right," David said quietly, turning to look at his brother, "about taking things one day at a time. It's the only way to do this." Michael smiled, his eyes filled with the kind of understanding that only comes from shared experience. It's the only way to live. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, David sat alone in the quiet of his living room, reflecting on how far he had come. The weight of the past still lingered, but it no longer felt like a burden. Instead, it felt like a part of his journey, a part of the story that had brought him to this point. For years, David had been running from his family, from his responsibilities, from the life he had left behind. But now, as he sat in the stillness of the night, he realized that he wasn't running anymore. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, with the people who mattered most: Ethan, Emma, Michael, his family. And for the first time, David allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was doing something right. The days grew longer as summer stretched into full bloom, and with the warm weather came a new sense of hope for David. For the first time, in what felt like years, his life was no longer dominated by the pressures of work, the ghosts of his past, or the uncertainty of his future. Instead, he was surrounded by family, by the people who truly mattered. Each day felt like a small step toward healing, toward building something new. Ethan and Emma had grown closer, their bond deepening with each passing day. They spent most afternoons together, running through the backyard, playing soccer, or inventing elaborate games that only children could create. David watched them with a mixture of pride and gratitude, knowing that this connection was something he could never have predicted, but was exactly what they all needed. But there was still one last piece of the puzzle left unfinished: the future. David had spent so much time trying to repair the past that he hadn't allowed himself to think about what came next. Now, as the dust settled around him, he found himself wondering what kind of future he wanted to build. For himself, for Ethan, and for the family he had rediscovered. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, David stood on the porch, watching Ethan and Emma chase fireflies in the yard. The warm glow of the setting sun bathed everything in a golden light, and for a moment the world felt perfect, like everything had fallen into place. Lindsay joined him a few moments later, a glass of wine in her hand. She leaned against the porch railing, watching the kids with a soft smile. "They look so happy," she said quietly, her voice filled with warmth. David nodded, his heart swelling at the sight of Ethan's laughter, the sound of Emma's giggles filling the air. "Yeah, they're great together." Lindsay took a sip of her wine, then turned to David, her expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about the future, about what comes next for all of us." David glanced at her, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What do you mean?" Lindsay hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "I want what's best for Ethan, and I think what's best is for him to have both of his parents in his life. But I also know that our lives are complicated." David's chest tightened at the unspoken weight of her words. He knew that Lindsay was trying to navigate the delicate balance between their shared past and the new path they were on as co-parents. It wasn't easy. Their history was filled with missed opportunities, with choices that had kept them apart for years. But now, they were both committed to being there for Ethan, and that mattered more than anything. "I want to be there for him too," David said softly, "whatever that looks like." Lindsay smiled, though her eyes were filled with quiet uncertainty. "I think we're figuring it out, David, one step at a time." David nodded, his heart filled with gratitude for the patience and understanding Lindsay had shown him. She had given him the space he needed to find his footing as a father, and now they were working together to build something stable for Ethan. As they stood there, watching the kids, David felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. He had spent so long searching for success, for validation, for something to fill the void inside him. But now, he realized that what he had been searching for all along wasn't out there in the world. It was right here, in the laughter of his children, in the quiet moments shared with family. "What about you?" Lindsay asked after a long pause, her voice gentle but curious. "What do you want for the future?" David considered the question for a moment, staring out at the yard where Ethan and Emma were now lying on the grass, staring up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the sky. It was a simple question, but one that carried so much weight. For so long, his future had been defined by his career, by his ambitions. But now, everything had shifted. "I want to be there for Ethan," David said quietly, "and for Emma. I want to be present. I've spent so much time running from my past, from my responsibilities. I don't want to do that anymore." Lindsay smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. "You're already doing that, David. You've come a long way." David nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle into his heart. He had come a long way, but there was still more to do, still more to build. A few days later, David sat down with Michael in the backyard, the sun casting long shadows across the lawn as the evening stretched on. They had fallen into an easy routine over the past few weeks, sharing dinners and quiet conversations, but tonight felt different. There was a sense of finality in the air, as if they were on the brink of closing one chapter and opening another. "I've been thinking about the future," David said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Michael raised an eyebrow, glancing over at him. "Oh, yeah." David nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision he had been wrestling with for days. "I think it's time I take a step back from the company. I've been so focused on building my business, on chasing success, that I forgot what really matters. I don't want to keep making that mistake." Michael was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You sure about that? I know how much that company means to you." David smiled softly, his eyes filled with quiet conviction. "It used to be everything, but now I want something different. I want to be there for Ethan, for Emma. I want to spend time with my family, not just sitting in a boardroom." Michael nodded, his expression softening. "I get that. And honestly, David, I think it's the right move. You've worked hard for years. You deserve to enjoy your life." David let out a breath, the tension that had been building inside him finally beginning to release. "I didn't think it would feel this easy." "Letting go, I mean?" Michael smiled, his eyes filled with understanding. "That's because you're finally letting go of the right things." David looked out at the yard, where Ethan and Emma were sitting together under the trees, their heads close as they whispered to each other. It was a quiet, peaceful moment, one that reminded David of everything he had been missing for so long. "I think I'm ready for this," David said softly. "I'm ready for something new." Michael clapped him on the shoulder, his smile widening. "Then go for it. You've got people who love you, David, and that's more than most people can say." David smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. A few weeks later, David made the official announcement that he was stepping back from his role at the company. His decision was met with surprise from his colleagues and business partners, but it was a decision he felt confident in. He had spent so much of his life chasing success, believing that it was the key to happiness. But now, he realized that true happiness came from the connections he had built with the people he loved. The transition wasn't easy. Walking away from the company he had built from the ground up felt like closing the door on a huge part of his life. But as he watched Ethan and Emma grow closer, as he spent more time with Michael and Lindsay, he knew that he had made the right choice. He was finally present. On a warm summer evening, David stood by the pool in his backyard, watching as Ethan and Emma splashed around, their laughter filling the air. Michael and Lindsay sat nearby, chatting quietly as they watched the kids play. It was a simple scene, but one that filled David with a sense of peace and fulfillment he had never known before. As the sun began to set, casting the sky in hues of pink and gold, David felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Michael standing beside him, a smile on his face. "You did it, David," Michael said softly. "You've built something real." David smiled, his heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you, without all of you." Michael chuckled, shaking his head. "You're giving me too much credit. This is all you, brother." David looked out at the yard, at the family he had fought so hard to rebuild, and felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over him. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, of fear, of uncertainty, but now, as he stood here, surrounded by the people who mattered most, he knew that it had all been worth it. He had finally found his place, not in a boardroom, not in the pursuit of wealth or success, but right here, with his family, and for the first time in his life, David felt whole. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.